The spectacular tournament of King's Landing. Outside of the Mixpav. The tournament grounds stretched wide and grand, a celebration of splendor befitting a king's heir. 3 distinct arenas had been carved from the earth just outside the city walls, the jousting lists, a field for melee, and a smaller ring where archers would test their aim. Towering above them all stood a grand pavilion, draped in banners of Baratheon black and gold, flanked by Lannister crimson and Arryn blue. The scent of summer grass mingled with roasted meats and sweet wine, drifting up from the sea of spectators crowding the field beyond. At its heart, a raised dais rested beneath a richly adorned canopy, casting deep shade over the royal box. The sun blazed overhead, but the realm's highest-born lounged beneath silken luxury. King Robert Baratheon sat proud and loud at the center, a heavy antler crown upon his brow and an even heavier goblet in his hand. To his right, Queen Cersei Lannister was a vision of crimson and gold, untouched by the heat, unreadable as ever behind green eyes that missed nothing. Seated slightly apart in a reserved section of the platform was the young Crown Prince Durandon Baratheon, publicly just past his 6, yet already bearing the posture of one far older. Beside him were Lady Elise Arryn, quiet and composed, and Lady Rhaenys Targaryen, whose very presence drew more whispers than all the knights in the lists combined. Nearer the king, Lord Tywin Lannister had taken his place, the weight of Westeros pulled in his stare. He had arrived from Castle Rock just recently, and his presence felt like a sword unsheathed, silent but undeniably dangerous. Lords and ladies from every corner of the realm filled the pavilion, their silks and velvets a riot of house colors. Across the field, tens of thousands crowded into wooden stands or perched atop makeshift scaffolds. The capital was swollen with revelers, every inn, from the street of silk to the lice-ridden shacks near the mud gate, bursting with coin, drink, and song. King's Landing was drunk on festival, and just as drunk on wine. Brawls, stabbings, and impromptu horse races down the Street of Sisters kept the city watch busy, though their newfound spirit was finally beating the rust from the old force. Corruption still lingered, but it no longer ruled. From behind his well-practiced composure, the master of coin watched the spectacle unfold. The influx of gold and trade would more than balance the prizes, assuming, of course, the victors could be persuaded to accept favors, writs, or tax delays in place of hard coin. And if they couldn't, well, clever men could always invest gold they didn't yet have. A few rows down from the king, a sardonic voice cut through the chatter. "Your Grace," said Tyrion Lannister, lounging with a goblet already in hand despite the hour. Dressed in wine dark red and gold, he wore a smirk curled beneath his sharp nose. "I hear you've a fondness for games of chance." Robert's laugh boomed across the pavilion. "You've heard right." Tyrion rose and swaggered closer, ignoring the disapproving glance from Queen Cersei, and the colder one from Lord Tywin, with all the grace of a man used to being unwelcome. 100 gold dragons says my dear brother Jaime wins the joust. He offered, raising his cup. "Unless, of course, you're afraid of losing your coin to a Lannister." "Done." The king grinned as he raised his goblet to a passing servant. "I'll wager the same amount on the Hound. The younger Clegane is just mad and big enough to knock your brother on his ass." Before their toast could be sealed, another voice chimed in, warm, hearty, and just slightly pompous. "Mind if I join in this little gamble?" Lord Mace Tyrell approached in a velvet storm of green trimmed with sable, the gold mantle of Highgarden gleaming in the sun. He wore his usual self-satisfied smile, the kind that made a man wonder if he were truly a fool or just a master of pretending. Tyrion's grin faltered, if only slightly. The Tyrells had begun shedding their Targaryen loyalty since Jaime's sword had cut the Mad King down. Mace Tyrell might not be driven by ideology, but opportunism was a beast with its own kind of hunger. At least he wasn't Doran Martell, who cloaked his intentions in silence and diplomatic distance. The more, the merrier. Let the lad write this down. Robert, oblivious or unconcerned, roared with laughter before nodding to a young servant who quickly scrambled for parchment and ink. "The little Lannister has picked the Kingslayer. I've taken the Hound since his older brother isn't around." "Who's your coin on, Tyrell?" 100 gold dragons on Esser Barristan. Mace said without hesitation. "A knight of honor and, I'd wager, unmatched skill." "A respectable choice," Tyrion murmured, sipping his wine. "Though I've rarely heard of honor winning against raw talent. Still, wish you best of luck." Mace smiled, but his eyes were unreadable. "As do I. I'm only here for the sport," Robert said, raising his cup in salute. "Though if I win, I expect to see my winnings before the wine wears off." A long, low horn echoed across the field then, and the crowd's excitement turned to hush. "I believe the first event is the archery competition," Tyrion remarked, lounging back with his cup. "Thank the gods I didn't wager on that. Bows are even less reliable than my usual pastimes." Durrandon Baratheon's Pav. The scent of trampled grass, oil-waxed bowstrings, and summer sweat filled the air as I slipped into the line of archery contestants, clad in the leathers and loose garb I had carefully selected for my Jasier dandelion's persona. Around my bicep was a small wooden badge, painted with the symbol of a drawn bow, the mark of a competitor. A dozen others stood around me, some seasoned archers tightening their strings, others wide-eyed squires trying not to drop their quivers. All of us herded along toward the archery field by squawking stewards and the murmuring roar of the crowd beyond the railings. Children perched on shoulders, hawkers weaved between nobles with trays of sweet wine and lemon cakes, and the sound of some distant bards, musical instruments danced through the festival air. That's when the voice reached me. Sweet, teasing, and sharpened just enough to cut. Hey, pretty boy, did you get lost? I turned slightly, catching sight of the speaker. A girl, just on the edge of womanhood, wearing layers of yellow and purple silk laced with tiny gemstones that glittered under the sun. She was graceful, dangerously so, with sleek black hair that shimmered like obsidian and almond eyes that assessed me like a cat watching a bird decide whether or not to fly. She looked about 13, a touch older than Elise, but carried herself like a princess used to holding court. Behind her stood 3 other girls dressed in Dornish fashion, light fabrics, different skin colors, confidence in the tilt of their hips. One wore armor while the other carried herself with the obvious care of concealed weapons. All of them were smirking. I knew them. I'd seen them recently, from the shadows of my instant dungeon subtle portal, during Rhaenys' quiet reunion with her kin. Arianne Martell, Princess of Dorne, LV, 0. Obara Sand, eldest of the Sand Snakes champion, LV, 5. Nymeria Sand, second oldest of the Sand Snakes thief, LV, 4. Tyene Sand, third oldest of the Sand Snakes, LV, 0. The proud young woman before me could only be Arianne Martell, Princess of Dorne, and behind her, the unpolished gems of what would become the infamous Sand Snakes. You're admittedly better looking than the others, she said, her tone half mocking, half appraising until her gaze lingered. And those arms. I smirked and crossed them. Archery isn't just about strength. It's hand-eye coordination. And if you mean to use it in a fight, say, in the chaos of a real battle, skill becomes essential. Speed too. Her lips curved. A charmer and a philosopher. Don't tell me you've signed up for the melee as well. That pretty head of yours might not survive the afternoon. Her hair lifted in the breeze, brushing over one shoulder like a black banner. There was something knowing behind her teasing, a test, maybe. One I had no intention of failing. True, deaths are allowed, I said, tilting my head. But rare, and I like my odds. Besides, I added, flicking a glance at the targets being set in the field ahead, today's archery round is just that. Target shooting. No danger there would compare to one of my thrilling hunts. Modesty is clearly beneath you. Arianne graced me with her gentle sarcasm. I smiled. Not at all. I just save it for those who surprise me. That earned a laugh, sharp, amused, genuine. So tell me, gallant boy, what do they call you? I'll need a name in case I have to inform the guards about the charming corpse in the field. The name, I said with a dramatic half-bow, is Jasier Dandelions. I would ask you to remember it, but I suspect that, in time, you'll hear it in songs before you even think to recall it yourself. Arianne let out a peal of laughter, delicate fingers brushing her lips. Gods, you're insufferable. And bold. I like bold. I shrugged, adjusting my quiver on my back and making sure the string of my soot-stained goldenheart shortbow was still taut. You haven't seen a fraction of it, my lady. Her cousins whispered and grinned behind her, teasing her, most likely, but Arianne stood straighter then, hands on her hips. Well, then, since you clearly know who I am, there's no need for introductions, but I'll humor you. I'm Arianne Martell, Princess of Dorne. And these are my cousins. We've come to see the tournament with my father. It is truly an honor to meet the princesses of Dorne, whose reputation does no justice to your true beauty and wonderful smile. I feigned surprise and dipped into a deeper, more theatrical bow. She tilted her head, eyeing me with faint amusement. I should have known you'd recognize us the moment I said my name. I opened my mouth to respond, but one of the Sand Snakes, Nymeria, judging by the dark, calculating eyes and the way she touched Arianne's shoulder without needing permission, leaned in and whispered something to her. Arianne hesitated. For just a flicker, the veil of amusement slipped. But she nodded all the same. Well, we must get back to the pavilion. My father doesn't like waiting, she said, clearly reluctant. She stepped away, but cast a glance back over her shoulder. If you survive this and keep all your limbs attached, perhaps we'll meet again. I nodded. I'll look forward to it, princess. Arianne flashed one last wink before disappearing into the crowd with her cousins, their silks fluttering like bright banners in the wind. I watched until they vanished into the press of bodies, then turned back to the field, rolling my shoulders once and letting out a slow breath. Time to give them something to remember. Ariane Mertel's Pav. You sure were interested in that silly merchant. Nymeria said, brushing her dark curls behind her ear with a sly smile that didn't need explaining. Cute, sure, and those arms certainly caught your eye. But he's no highborn. You know your father wouldn't be pleased if you got too cozy with someone like that. Obara grunted her agreement, arms folded across her chest like she was ready to punch someone just for existing. Tyene, ever the picture of innocence, kept that sweet little smile on her lips, like a doll carved from honeyed marble, but her eyes gleamed with quiet mischief. I only smirked and gave a dramatic shrug. I don't know why, but he was fun to talk to. Not shy, not full of himself like so many other boys we've met. And come now, did you see his muscles? I licked my lips and grinned, unable to help myself. A body like that isn't built on lies and poetry alone. Nymeria giggled and looped her arm through mine. Mother Royne save us, you sound just like my father. Too horny for your own good. He touched my cheeks, but I didn't deny it. I'd once been half in love with my uncle a baron. Every girl in Dorne had a phase like that for the forbidden. I smacked Nymeria's arm playfully, and we both laughed. You're the heir to Sunspear, she said in mock seriousness. Not a tavern girl from the Shadow City. Maybe reign in the ogling, Ari. And as heir to Sunspear, I replied, standing a little taller. I should be able to choose my own lover, don't you think? I cast a glance behind us, hoping for another glimpse of Jasier dandelions through the sea of people. He was gone, hidden by the crowd, but the ghost of that roguish grin lingered in my mind, like a challenge I'd already accepted. I'll choose carefully when it comes to marriage, but that doesn't mean I can't have a little fun before then. I love you, Tyene said brightly, clapping her hands together with delight. You always say what I'm thinking, just louder and prettier. Nymeria rolled her eyes, and even Obara let out a reluctant chuckle. As we made our way back toward the Martell Pavilion, we passed rows of colorful merchant stands, none of them Dornish. The smells were foreign, spices too sharp, perfumes too sweet, smoke and roast and fire everywhere. It was my first time outside Dorne, and though I tried not to show it, I was drunk on the sights. Father had brought us to King's Landing to meet our cousin, Princess Rhaenys, and to get a proper look at the realm we were tied to by blood, but rarely by choice. My first impression of her had been, fine. Sweet. Proper. But she was only barely past her 8-name day, still all ribbons and reverence. Time would tell what sort of queen she might become. And King's Landing, well, the stench wasn't that bad. Not as bad as the horror stories made it sound. I'd expected to be disgusted. Instead, I was intrigued. The noise faded as we reached our section of the royal viewing stands. Here, the lords and ladies sat stiff-backed, whispering behind jeweled fans. My father, Prince Doran, waited with his usual patience, watching the proceedings below with unreadable eyes. He'd made it clear we were to be models of decorum during our visit. No escapades. No acting like Uncle Abaron. It amused me to no end. My uncle's passions were part of what made him so beloved. I'd seen him with more lovers than I could count, some women, some men, and at least one pair of twins, and more than once, I'd caught glimpses of his indulgences in the courtyards. Father had banned him from that garden for a fortnight once, but Abaron only laughed and found new places to misbehave. I wonder how that dandelions fella will fare in this first stage. Nymeria teased, resting her head against my shoulder once we were safely out of my father's line of sight. For all his bravado, his fine clothes were barely fit for a traveling bard. I hummed and leaned forward, peering through the crowds until I spotted him again. There, lute in hands, already singing to those around him like he hadn't a care in the world. He's performing, I murmured, amused. Of course he is. 10 silver stags say he'll shoot himself in the foot or someone else by mistake before the second round. Obara grinned. I ignored her and kept watching him. Do you think he's really just a merchant? Tyene asked, her voice as soft as a feather, but the curiosity behind it sharp. Or perhaps something else. His hands didn't look like they belonged to a trader. Too smooth to be calloused, too clean for a craftsman, and yet strong. Like he knows how to kill. The way she said it, gently, almost kindly, made Obara pause. Even Nymeria lifted her head. I glanced sideways at Tyene, her face all sweetness and sunlight. You noticed that? She beamed. I always notice. Nymeria sat up and gave Tyene a light shove. If you keep acting like that, we're all going to start thinking you're the dangerous one. Oh, but I am. Tyene said with a little giggle, then twirled a strand of her golden hair around her finger. Just in the quiet ways. We all laughed, and for a moment, I felt like no matter what happened in this city, what alliances were made, what wars were born, we would face it together. 4 girls from Dornish, bold as flame, each dangerous in their own way. And somewhere down there, singing to the wind like it might carry his song to the gods, was a young man who'd made me smile, and perhaps something more. The archery field sprawled wide across the northern end of the tourney grounds, second in size only to the melee pits. Rows of colorful banners fluttered in the wind, and dozens of circular targets stood planted in neat lines, each row farther than the last. The grass had been flattened by countless boots, and the distant thrum of strings loosing arrows created a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the competition itself. The rules were simple. 15 archers lined up at once, each loosing a single arrow. Only the top marksman from each group would move on. With so many hopefuls, the culling was brutal, 14 eliminated with every round. From our seats, I couldn't make out the precise results. We were seated on the right side of the pavilion, far from the action, but I could still make out enough to know Jasier Dandelions hadn't taken his turn yet. He wasn't hard to spot when he did. When the next group of contestants stepped onto the shooting line, one of them stood out at once. Dark-haired, dressed with more flair than function, and smiling like he'd stumbled into a bard's tale instead of a bloodless war of skill. "That him?" Obara asked, squinting toward the field, her tone dry. I smiled, tilting my head. "That's him." He stood out even more when he dropped his battered helmet to the grass beside his feet and casually drew his bow, a smaller, unadorned thing that looked more suited for hunting rabbits than winning tourneys. Around him, older men with weathered faces and solemn faces adjusted their gear with purpose. Jasier, by contrast, looked positively delighted to be there. "He's the only one here who looks like he owns a silk pillow," Obara muttered. "Probably lost a drinking bet and thought this would be the honorable way out." Nymeria chuckled, then reached over and lightly tapped my cheek. "Stop smiling like that. If your father sees, he's going to start asking questions." I rolled my eyes but instinctively glanced up toward the higher seats, where Prince Doran sat like a statue carved from patience and expectations. Then I glared back at Nymeria. "I'm serious," she teased, nudging me with her elbow. "You've got the same dreamy face my father gets when he's halfway to betting someone." "I am not smitten," I snapped, perhaps too loudly. Tyene giggled softly behind her jeweled fan, and Nymeria all but melted against my side. "Oh gods, you are blushing." "Shut up," I hissed, tugging my shawl tighter. "Just watch the damn competition." When I looked back at the field, the round had already ended. My heart sank. Had I missed his shot? Was he walking off with the rest of the failures? But no. There he stood, grinning lazily among the winners, one of only a handful moving on to the second round. He adjusted his quiver like it was part of a performance, shortbow resting casually in his hand, as if he belonged here more than any of them. "Wow," I breathed. "He actually made it through." Nymeria raised her cup in mock salute and sipped her summer wine. "Looks like he's not just a pretty face after all." Obara scoffed and leaned back with her arms crossed. "There are still plenty of rounds to go. Care to double my bet, princess?" I didn't answer. Not right away. Nymeria, ever the realist, filled the silence. "He'll trip over his own charm before the finals." I should have agreed. But for some strange reason, I didn't. Despite everything, the silk and black leathers, the smile, the foolish bravado, part of me wanted him to win. Not just to prove them wrong. But because there was something there. Something else. He stepped back onto the shooting line as the second round began. 15 archers again, fewer now, more serious than before. The targets had been moved farther away, perhaps twice the distance from before. I could barely see the arrowheads glint from here. The announcers had explained it earlier. 5 rounds total, thinning the field each time, until only 2 archers remained for the final shot. That one, they said, would stretch across the entire field. It would take more than charm to win this. It would take skill, luck, and maybe something else entirely. I leaned forward, unable to stop watching. Durrandon Baratheon's Pav. Eyes followed me as I stepped up to the line, not with respect, not yet, but with confusion. Whispered questions passed among the competitors, and even some of the crowd. How had the peacock with the cheap helm and the troubadour grin made it to the second round? I chuckled under my breath. Let them wonder. They hadn't trained in an instant dungeon where every missed shot could very well mean death, where dead things clawed and bit and bled you dry if you got too close. Where each arrow was a decision between survival and game over. No, most of them had trained in castles and yards, the best amongst them hunted for food, not to slay predators before they came for them. I had trained in necessity, through fear and exhaustion. "All right you lot, draw your arrows," one of the judges called, raising his hand. 15 bows creaked in unison, the sound oddly intimate, like wood groaning under the weight of 100 expectations. I drew my arrow back with practiced ease, breathing steady as I aligned my sights. The target was further than before, a distance most of these men respected. I only smiled. Release. We all heard the judges shout. As the signal came, I silently invoked my true strike cantrip, a whisper of magic that shimmered along my fingertips and eyes, subtle and unseen by the crowd. My fingers let go. The arrow soared, trailing the faintest glimmer along its iron tip. It hummed through the air like a promise, and when it struck true. The dead center of the target swallowed the point completely. Bullseye. I lowered my bow and turned away without even watching the others. I didn't need to. Confidence didn't strut, it simply stood tall, results in hand. A few of the other archers were staring now. Some with suspicion, others with quiet awe. One or two just looked angry. I rejoined the winners' area, where a growing number of small folk were already cheering me on. They didn't know my name yet, but they liked my flair. I gave them a wink, a nod, and even struck a ridiculous pose or two for the children near the edge of the ropes. Let the knights have their lances. I had charisma. Truth be told, it was all still a little surreal. I'd never so much as touched a bow in my old life, never even came close enough in a competition to even dream about the golden medal. But here I was, charming the masses, nailing perfect shots from increasing distances, and starting to hear the murmurs ripple through the crowd. He hit center again. One child shouted loud enough for me to hear. Who is that one, the singer? I heard a fellow competitor ask for me. They say he's a noble, no, a bard, no, a hedge knight, a judge replied soon after. Let them speculate. I was all those things. And more. Because while my rivals had reputations, experience, and perhaps bloodlines in the case of the few Tarly soldiers, I had the system. My steady aim, my sharpshooter's precision, my disguised goldenheart shortbow, they weren't just talent. They were earned, and that gap between me and the others, it would only grow wider with time. Hopefully it won't take long before I start leading men through the fiercest of battlefields, earning not only glory but respect of foes and allies alike. In any case, the rounds passed like the slow rise of a crescendo. Round 3, another bullseye. Round 4, same. Not once did my arrow stray, not even by a hair. The only question the judges ever asked was how deep my arrow had landed when compared to another contestant's perfect shot. Each time, I won. People began placing last-minute bets on me. I could hear coins clinking, names shouted, odds whispered behind cupped hands. The bard, yes, never seen anything like it. Swear it, the arrow glowed with the light of the seven as it flew. By the time the final round arrived, I had a half-dozen nicknames echoing from the stands. Balladeer of the Bullseye, Esser Serenade and Arrow Minstrel were my favorites so far. And there he was, my final opponent, Jalabar Exho, the exiled Summer Island prince. Tall, lean, focused. His bow was a work of art, and the man clearly knew how to use it. He had glided through the tournament with grace and silent skill. But I had come to steal the thunder of Loras Tyrell years before the boy had even grown into his flowery legend. And nothing, not exile, not nobility, not even foreign experience, was going to get in my way. Flexing my fingers, I could already feel the weight of the final arrow. From this far, the targets looked like pinpricks on parchment. But that challenge only made the shot sweeter. I was ready, and the crowd, they were ready too, no longer whispering, but chanting my name. Outside of the Mixpav. High above the field, beneath the royal pavilion's golden canopy, eyes both amused and wary followed the bard with the bow. Did that man truly make it to the final round? Esser Jaime Lannister asked, arms crossed over his pristine white armor. His tone was light, but his eyes followed the bard with a curious squint. He looks more like he belongs on a stage than in a tourney field. I was halfway through telling the gold cloaks to escort him back to the brothel he came from. He draws a bow better than most knights draw a sword. Esser Barristan Selmy replied, his tone level but intrigued. Background matters little when it comes to skill. Some men are simply born with it. He tilted his head slightly. Still, there's something strange about him. Too calm, too collected, like he's done this 1,000 times. He smirks like he knows the outcome. Jaime added, his lips twitching into a half grin. I hate that. Barristan didn't respond, though in truth, the bard reminded him of another boy from years past, another youth who had carried himself with casual certainty, and now wore white. He folded his arms and watched the bard take his stance. Meanwhile, a few steps above them, King Robert bellowed out a laugh that echoed across the pavilion. 1,000 gold dragons on the fancy lad. He shouted, casually slapping his muscular hand against Tyrion's back with enough force to nearly knock the smaller man off balance. Tyrion chuckled, steadying himself with a goblet. Why not, Your Grace? Though I suspect the Summer Islanders' bow cost more than the bard's entire wardrobe. I'll keep my silver on tradition. Robert snorted. Tradition can go bugger itself. The boy's got flair. And I like flair. Seated near them, Lord John Arryn raised a pale brow. He's not just a showman. The hand said, voice low but firm. There's discipline behind the swagger. Every movement is measured. A performer with restraint. Tyrion mused. That's rarer than a penniless Lannister. I'll drink to that. Robert grunted, draining his cup. Further back in the pavilion, Queen Cersei sat with elegant poise, her green eyes narrowing ever so slightly as they followed the bard's every movement. How peculiar, she said, as if tasting the word. A no-name with a penchant for dramatics suddenly becomes a rising star. These kinds of stories usually end with a knife in someone's back. I'm more interested in where he learned to shoot like that. Lord Tywin said coolly from her left, fingers steepled beneath his chin. And who taught him? He hadn't spoken for most of the competition, but now his eyes were fixed sharply on the bard, not as a source of amusement but as a potential threat. Unknown variables were rarely good news. Perhaps we're looking at a sellsword with delusions of nobility. He added, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Or worse, an assassin in disguise. A bard is never just a bard. Their lot thrives on trading secrets. Murmured Grand Maester Pycelle, stroking his beard as if he'd uncovered some ancient truth with scholarly gravitas. Much like ravens with grain, yes. That one doesn't seem to trade secrets. Muttered Tywin Lannister, his voice grave. He collects them. Locked behind that grin of his. The Lord of Castle Rock leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed in quiet scrutiny. I'd wager he's not here for sport alone. He's charming the small folk. Cersei said with disdain. Listen to them, they chant like he's some knightly hero. It's sickening. Tywin didn't reply. He merely watched. Evaluating. Calculating. On the opposite side of the royal stand, Mace Tyrell shifted uncomfortably in his gilded seat. Quite the shot, I'll give him that. He said to no one in particular, stroking his doublet as if trying to straighten it further. Though these competitions are often deceptive. The true test is consistency, poise under pressure. He glanced sideways at the crowd of people embracing the few flowers he threw at them. Still, what is a bard doing outshining noble sons and knights? It's irregular. The crowd doesn't seem to mind. A Reachman lord offered with a grin. Yes, well, Mace said with a forced chuckle. The crowd once cheered for Rhaegar Targaryen, too, before he nearly cost my house everything. Nearby, the two younger Baratheon brothers shared the moment. 12-year-old Renly leaned forward on the railing, face alight. Did you see that? He barely blinked before losing it. I want to shoot like that. You want to be like that? Stannis said without looking at him, arms crossed stiffly. Smiling. Mocking. Playing to the crowd. Renly shrugged. He's winning, isn't he? Stannis's jaw tightened, his eyes not leaving the bard. We'll see. Not far from the royal pavilion, nestled beneath a canopy of silk and shadow, Lord Varys observed the bard through the veil of his lashes, his powdered face placid as a still pond. I must admit, I'm surprised. The eunuch murmured to no one in particular, though a nearby little bird tilted her head as if listening. Our charming little bard seems to have sprung fully formed from the gutter, yet last night, he was already being toasted in Chataya's brothel like a beloved guest. He tapped a finger gently against the lacquered wood of his armrest. So quick to win hearts. One wonders what else he's come to win. The bard made a show of his sleight of hand tricks with his arrows, effortless and unhurried, his poise theatrical, his smile practiced. Varys's eyes narrowed the way a spider watches a fly spin silk of its own. He had sent birds the moment the name, Jasier Dandelion, had flitted through silk-curtained rooms and perfume salons. No known house, no true accent, no trace in any ledger, ship registry, or old whore's memory. Too refined for the streets. Too poor for the courts. A ghost, dressed in velvet. And ghosts, he knew, were never born, they were made. A mask, then, and behind every mask, someone else's game. Unbeknownst to the spider, far across the stands, seated beneath a tasteful arrangement of reach flowers and highborn gossip, Lord Petyr Baelish traced the rim of his wine cup with idle fingers, though his eyes never left the bard. Fascinating fellow, he said to a silk-robed handmaiden who wasn't expected to answer. The way he handles the crowd, it's like he was born for the stage. He watched as the bard winked at a girl in the front row and tossed her a flower, sending the crowd into fresh waves of delight. Baelish's smile barely twitched, but his mind raced ahead. That kind of adoration was rare, and dangerous. But it could be bottled. Sold. Weaponized. Popularity is a candle, he whispered, mostly to himself. Bright and warm, until someone places it too close to the curtain. His gaze lingered on the bard's bow. Then on the subtle strength behind the draw. Not just a performer, that one. Not just a pretty face. There was precision there. Discipline. Control. And worst of all, mystery. I wonder what it would cost, he mused, voice low. To make a bard sing only for me. Then he laughed softly, sipping his wine, and filed the question away, like a name in a ledger, or a debt yet to be collected. His mind was already tallying costs. A new establishment at the Street of Silk. A partnership with the bard himself. How much would it take to tempt him? Coin, protection, fame. Everyone has a price. Littlefinger whispered, his smile growing. The trick is finding it before someone else does and paying it before they realize how much they're actually worth. Ariane Mertel's Pav. By the great river Rhoyne, I can't believe he's actually in the final round. Obara said, sitting up straight with sudden focus, her earlier boredom burned away by fresh adrenaline. Men like him should have better things to do than knocking sticks and aiming at straw targets. For the past hour, none of us had spoken much. We were too busy watching him. Jasier Dandelion, the bard with the bow and the smirk. The performer with the gall to charm a city full of wolves. I'd meant to watch the competition casually, like any noble lady at a tourney, with idle curiosity, not investment. But somewhere between his first shot and the third round, I'd stopped pretending. Now I was half leaning over the edge of the pavilion, elbows pressed to the silken rail, heart stupidly fluttering. If he wins, half the city will be poorer by nightfall. Nymeria murmured beside me, her voice low and amused. It would be a delicious upset. She didn't take her eyes off him, but her hand found mine and squeezed it, a quiet tether to keep me from tumbling over the edge in my excitement. I didn't mind. Both of us always did like troublemakers, and this bard was weaving himself into a proper storm. I hope he wins, I said, barely above a whisper. Of course you do. Obara snorted. Her tone was dry, but there was the faintest edge of annoyance. Likely still bitter from losing silver stags on our last wager, a rare thing, when she usually bet with her fists. Shut up, I snapped, though not with heat. My voice was soft, too full of tension to be angry. That black bow of his is strange. Tyene said thoughtfully, tilting her head. It behaves like that summer islander golden one. Her blonde hair caught the sun like spun silk, but her eyes, soft though they appeared, were watching the bard like a hawk. But it's not just the bow. It's the way he moves. Calm, but not overly careful. Like he's hiding something he knows no one will uncover. Maybe he is, Nymeria said, her lips curling into that fox-like smile of hers. She leaned against me, shoulder to shoulder. I like the mystery. She traced a finger along the edge of one of her hidden daggers, tucked just beneath her belt. I saw her watching the bard's hands, the way he palmed the arrow, twirled it, made it part of the performance. It wasn't just flair. It was skill, intentional and dangerous. Careful, Nym, I teased, glancing sideways. You're starting to sound like me. She only hummed in reply, eyes still locked on the target below. We all fall for the knife eventually. Yours just came early with a song. That made me laugh, a short, sharp breath, but real. Obara muttered something in Old Rhoynish that I didn't quite catch, and Tyene just smiled sweetly, the way she always did before saying something wicked. But for a brief moment, the four of us weren't daughters of the most dangerous and influential men in Dorne. We were just girls, watching a boy, and wondering what kind of fire he might bring next. Durrandon Baratheon's Pav. Ready your bows, barked the main judge, his voice clear and steady behind the final two contestants. Draw your arrows. Jalabar Exho stood beside me, flamboyant and proud in his own way as he wore his usual bright feathered garb. The summer islander, not much older than 20, had his arrow nocked and ready, his longbow drawn with the elegance of a man who had trained all his life for this moment. Sweat rolled from his brow, trailing down his jaw and dripping onto his collar. 10,000 gold dragons were at stake, not just coin, but the keys to a throne lost, a future reclaimed. With that gold, Jalabar might raise men, buy ships, and carve out a place for himself once more in the Summer Isles, far from the biting chill of Westerosi winters. But between him and that dream stood a dark horse rival who managed to outmatch every opponent he came across. Me. May the best archer win, declared the Summer Islander. He didn't glance my way, didn't need to. His voice rang out with a practiced noble etiquette flair. Thanks to my insight skill, it was clear to me that he wondered if I was trembling. If I doubted myself. I wasn't and I didn't. My arms were loose, fingers still, breath controlled. My eyes never left the target. I'd faced worse odds than this, moving targets in pitch-black tunnels, dead corpses that lunged from shadow. Compared to that, an archery target beneath the sun was almost child's play. At least in theory. Because despite all the perks my system now granted me, Jalabar had the advantage of a longbow made of the same material as the compact shortbow of Goldenheart he gifted me in advance for my name day. Lucky me I had a great grasp of my disguise kit, otherwise I might have feared that Jalabar could be the one to suspect my real identity. Beautiful, deadly, but lacking in range, such was the bow in my hands. To match him, I'd need to arc my shot higher in consideration of my arrow's weight, judge the air's resistance of the open sky, compensate for the unexpected strong recoil my weapon gave despite its lighter weight. A single miscalculation would cost me both pride and prize. It was a stretch even for me, but 10,000 dragons and the respect that came with them were worth the risk. But I had something nothing else could compare. I had faith, not in the gods, but in myself. Release. Came the call and I loosed the string with practiced ease aided by some magical divination. Heroic inspiration use expended. As if time had slowed around me, eyes followed the feathered tail as the arrow soared high, nearly vanishing against the sky. Some in the crowd gasped, thinking I had botched it. But they didn't see what I saw. Didn't feel what I felt. The arc was perfect and the descent inevitable. As my arrow loomed closer to my target with each breath, I finally heard the echoing sound reverberating across the silent field. Thunk. Dead center. A flawless strike. Cheers erupted around us, a thunderous wave crashing over the grounds. I smiled faintly, not for the applause, but for the satisfaction of precision met with execution. Then I heard it, my adversary's cheer. Jalabar was applauding too, until he wasn't. Judges need a ruling, one of the officials immediately called out. The trio marched downrange to inspect both targets. Jalabar and I stood still, silent, the tension between us electric as they reached the marks, bent, inspected, then conferred with hushed urgency. Soon I understood why. Our arrows had struck the exact same spot. An undeniable tie. The Summer Islander turned to me and bowed his head, not as a man defeated, but as a marksman paying homage to his equal. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the nobles quieted. What's the result? Boomed a familiar voice. We turned to see King Robert standing, one large hand resting on the handle of his warhammer. He looked like he might storm the field himself if the answer took too long. The main judge jogged over, breathless. Your Grace, both arrows hit the bullseye, same depth, same placement. We declare a second shot. Then what are you waiting for? The king roared. Let's see it done. The judge scurried back. The targets were cleared but left with the original arrows embedded, silent witnesses to what came next as the same three judges lined up behind us. Eyes narrowed and mouths shut. Draw your arrows, came the command. I heard Jalabar exhale slowly. He muttered something, a prayer in his summer tongue, soft and sharp like waves over coral. Release. His second arrow flew. Fast, clean, and just as true as the first. It struck almost beside the first one, just a hair off, but still within the bullseye. A lesser archer would have wept for joy. He smiled instead, confident. Hopeful. He could practically smell the gold coming to him and feel the tightness of the women he was going to get after reclaiming his birthright. Until he looked at my target. His smile shattered once he sighted my arrow which had landed in the exact same place as before. Only, the first arrow was no longer intact. The second had split it, shaft sundered down the middle, fletching torn apart. The broken halves now flared out from the target's blade like a courtesan's skirts at court, extravagant, torn, and impossible to ignore. My second arrow buried deeper than the first, rammed through it, embedded into the heart of the target like a dagger between ribs. The crowd erupted soon as they recovered themselves from what they witnessed. We have a winner, shouted the main judge, raising my hand to the sky. By all the gods, I've never seen the like. Probably the most skilled archer alive. Applause exploded like a storm. The nobles on the pavilion stood and clapped. Especially the Dornish girls, who'd watched the earlier rounds with the same intensity, were screaming with delight. And the king, my father, was laughing, his applause thunderous. I could clearly hear him bellow through the cheer. That's how it's done. I bowed, first to the crowd, then to the nobles, and finally to the king. Deep and slow, not a trace of surprise on my face or body language. Leaving them wondering if I'd expected this outcome all along. The judges approached, still glowing with disbelief. Please follow us to receive your winnings, my good man. One said. We can assign guards to escort you until you've properly secured it if you'd like. I held up a hand. One moment, please. Turning to Jalabar, I took his hand in a firm shake before raising his arm skyward. I would like to forfeit my prize. I announced, projecting my voice across the arena as loud as I could. To the man who gave me the finest challenge of my life. A beat of stunned silence until madness broke out. Cries rang out, some in awe, others in outrage. Had I lost my mind? Thrown away a fortune? Or had I actually managed to carve my name into legend with generosity and grace? Let them argue all they want, either way, they'd remember my name. Looking at Jalabar's still stunned expression, I mentally remarked that just like my Lannister side of the family, I paid my debts. Jon Arryn's Pav. The tourney held in celebration of the Crown Prince's 6th name day was a luxury the kingdom could scarcely afford. Especially now, with the sudden turn of the seasons after the rebellion. Since the fall of the Targaryens and the rise of House Baratheon, the realm had bled gold with reckless abandon. 1,000,000 dragons once kept safe within the Red Keep had begun to vanish into feasts, tourneys, and half-baked campaigns that pleased only the new king's appetites. Counting pennies as for misers. Robert often barked, waving away concern with a grin and a drink. But those of us who served him knew better. No one more so than I, the king's hand. I had known Robert since the boy's first sword lessons in the Vale, and that boy, despite the crown, despite the years, had never truly grown up. Every time he proposed another costly celebration, I would protest with quiet firmness, laying out ledgers, speaking of debts and obligations. And every time, Robert would laugh, clap me on the back, and ignore me. What were numbers compared to a night's glory or a cup of Arbor Red? This tourney was no different. I had tried to stop it, or at least scale it down, but Robert had been unmoved. It's the boy's name day, gods damn it. He'd said, as if that simple excuse could hide the extravagance. Let him see what a real realm looks like. The champion's prizes alone totaled more than 45,000 dragons. Logistics, tents, prizes, food, guards, another dozen thousand at least. Technically, the crown could still pay. Barely. But, just as I had expected, the Master of Coin had already reached out to Lord Tywin of Castle Rock. I had never been present for those negotiations, but I could well imagine the scene. Tywin's green eyes gleaming, his mouth curling, minimally, mockingly, as he lent the gold he knew would one way or another return to him tenfold. The Lannisters were buying the realm, one favor at a time. And Robert, my former ward, now my king, was selling it. What stung most was the bitter irony. The champions of these tourneys were almost always noblemen. So the gold borrowed from Castle Rock would simply flow back into the hands of other lords, reinforcing the cycle of debt and privilege. More often than not, Jaime Lannister himself would emerge victorious, reclaiming a portion of his family's loan through valor and flair. It was enough to make this old falcon want to fly far away. I could have skipped the tourney. I had considered it. There was always another letter to write, another scheme to block. But Robert had ordered my presence. You need to relax, Jon. Gods know I'll die of excitement if you don't come and frown beside me. So, I came. And, to my mild surprise, it wasn't wholly unpleasant. Well done. Robert bellowed now, slamming back his goblet of summer wine even as he lost a hefty sum in prize gold. I smiled faintly, watching the slim young man at the field's edge hoist his black bow overhead. The victor of the archery contest couldn't have been more than 22, yet he'd bested hundreds, sons of lords, knighted champions, famed marksmen from the Dornish marches. And he had done it with grace, precision, and a name like something from a bard's tale, Jasier Dandelions. The small folk and even the nobles were already chanting nicknames like Arrowminstrel. That a commoner had taken the gold was rare enough. But that he then forfeited it, quietly, without fanfare, to the Summer Islander he had bested, was truly unexpected. At least, I thought, that poor exiled prince would no longer need to beg the crown for coin to survive. Tyrion Lannister raised his wine with a smirk. An oddity, that one. I've never seen a man split an arrow, much less at that range. Not even during that massive bow contest in Lannisport. His mismatched eyes flicked across the lords gathered in the royal stand. They'll be falling over themselves to recruit him by sundown. I said nothing, but I noticed Tywin Lannister watching from a few rows above, his expression unreadable. Not disapproving, calculating, almost impressed. Had I not known Tywin so well, I might have mistaken it for interest. But Tywin did not spend gold where it did not benefit him tenfold. Jon, Robert roared again, elbowing me with drunken enthusiasm. He's almost as good as you were back in the day. I chuckled softly, bowing my head. You flatter me, your grace. But as I looked back at the young archer, a strange warmth stirred in my chest. No, I was never that good. It's heartening to see such skill rise from the small folk. I added more seriously. The sons of lords win too often. It's good to be surprised. Robert let out a booming laugh, raising his cup. Well said. It does make one wonder. Lord Mace Tyrell mused from the king's left, seated higher up on the dais. I hired the finest bowmasters in Westeros to train my Garland, and while the lad is exceptional, even he wouldn't split an arrow like that. Robert and I exchanged knowing glances. Garland Tyrell was already famed among the Reach for his martial promise. How did he learn? Mace went on. Who trained this, Arrowminstrel? I'd wager hunting, said Lord Randall Tarley, joining us with a stiff bow. Most archers of true skill hunt for survival. Rabbits and wolves move faster than targets, and bite harder when missed. Ha, Robert barked. I've hunted my whole life and I can't do that. He waved for more wine. That boy's leagues better than me, gods help us. Perhaps we should keep him. Stannis said, emerging from behind the royal dais, arms crossed, his face a block of stone. Such skill should serve the realm. I'd very much like to see him under my banner. Mace Tyrell agreed with a nod. I'm afraid you'll have to outbid my father, Lord Tyrell. Tyrion quipped, sipping his wine. Talent like that, we could use some color in dour old Castle Rock. Let's not fight over a man whose allegiances we do not yet know. I said, cutting in gently, ever the mediator. From what I've heard, this same lad is to compete in the melee. Perhaps we'll be surprised again. Indeed, Robert grinned broadly. Let's hope he knocks a few of those pompous knights on their asses. Or gets knocked down himself. Tyrion added with a shrug. Luck can be a dangerous illusion. I didn't respond. My eyes followed the young archer as the crowd began to shift toward the melee grounds. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest flicker of excitement while watching one of Robert's tournaments. Arianne Myrtell's Pav. I wanted to see Jasier one more time before he disappeared into the crowd or the melee, whichever claimed him first. I found him right where I first laid eyes on him, by the archery field, where splintered arrows still lay strewn across the grass like broken promises. He was surrounded by people, not lords or knights, but bakers, smiths, and sailors. They clapped his shoulders, offering words thick with admiration. Some of the other marksmen did the same, albeit stiffly, as if congratulating a man for beating them with a stolen weapon. Others looked at him like he'd cheated, like winning wasn't his place. On the stage, I caught sight of a chest. Someone whispered it was full of gold. His prize, tossed aside like it meant nothing, gifted to the Summer Islander without worries. Me and my cousins were still trying to decide if that was noble or stupid. Probably both. My eyes followed him. He was heading toward the melee grounds now. That's when it finally clicked, he was competing again. As I leaned against the wooden fence, I raised my voice. Care to tell me where you learned how to shoot a bow like that? He stopped and turned, blinking like I'd startled him. Good. I pointed straight at his face, not caring that we had an audience. Don't pretend I'm the first to ask. The way you split that arrow, people don't just do that. My jeweled slippers tapped impatiently against the packed dirt, my hair flinging from shoulder to shoulder with every toss of my head. For nearly a minute I didn't stop, questions, compliments and challenges. All spilling from my lips like wine. You are just too incredible. I finally sighed, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. He slung his quiver over his shoulder and smiled, easy, playful, like he hadn't just embarrassed half the realm's noble archers. Please, my princess, calm down a moment. He subtly flexed his bicep, the bastard knew exactly what he was doing. We'll have time to talk once the tourney ends. That is, if by then I'm still able to entice your interest. I hated that he made me blush. Even with my darker skin, I felt the flush creeping across my cheeks. I will hold you to that promise. I snapped, trying to sound commanding. He crossed his arms. I must say though, I'm flattered. I never thought the most beautiful girl in Dorne would take such interest in a little bard like me. My jaw dropped. I am not interested in you. He arched a brow, feigning innocence. Really? That minute-long interrogation of yours said otherwise. I opened my mouth to retort, but nothing clever came. He smiled again, softer this time. Don't worry, princess. You'll see me again. I know a thing or two on how to take care of myself. Crossing my arms, I stepped back with a mutter. Whatever, but when he walked away, confident and unbothered, I found myself whispering, more to myself than anyone else. I hope so. That's when I felt the presence of my cousins behind me. Obara was chewing a piece of dried fig, arms crossed and unimpressed. Archery is pretty, but I want to see how he handles a shield to the face. It's one thing to shoot at a target. Another to face someone who hits back. She spit the fig stem into the grass. Not that they'd let me fight. These Andal knights would faint at the sight of a woman in the melee. Perhaps it's because you're just too frightening, Obara. Nymeria teased, glancing sideways. Her eyes tracked Jasier like a hawk. I think he has secrets. The way he moves, it's too clean for a simple minstrel. Perhaps he worked for some assassin's guild. Or just a criminal that has been lucky enough to avoid being caught. Obara scoffed. You think every pretty man is a spy. Only the ones that look like trouble. Nymeria said with a sly smile. Tyene, dressed like a whisper of silk and sunlight, leaned closer to me. He's charming, I'll give him that. Her voice was light, airy, the perfect mask as always. Too charming. He makes girls blush, even our oh-so-poised princess. Then she giggled, but her next words were almost a purr. I tried to toy with him earlier. Innocent act, sweet smiles, he saw right through it. Told me I wasn't bad at pretending. My brows rose. If Tyene couldn't deceive him, that meant something. Obara cracked her knuckles. I say we let the melee decide. If he gets knocked on his ass in the first bout, you should all stop wasting thoughts on him. Even if we pretend to forget what he just accomplished here before everyone's eyes, what if he doesn't? Nymeria asked. Obara grinned. Then I might start. We watched him go as the crowd parted for him like waves before a ship, eyes still trailing his wake. Still, he didn't look back. I said nothing aloud, but in my heart, I whispered it once more, I hope so. Durrandon Baratheon's Pav. By the time I slipped past the gold and silver drapes of the royal pavilion, the noise of the archery field had faded into the distance, muffled applause, still echoing, still chasing a name that wasn't mine. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the perfume of lilac oil and lavender. Cushions lay scattered across low couches, untouched platters of sweets and dates resting beneath shaded canopies. The guards stationed at the entrance barely glanced my way, already trained to overlook the presence of a small boy dressed in Baratheon gold. Especially if that boy was the crown prince. Rhaenys turned first, hair gleaming, eyes bright with mischief. Where have you been? She asked, too cheerfully to be seen as the tragic Targaryen princess, ward of the crown. You missed everything. Everything, Elise echoed, bounding up beside her. Her errand blue gown billowed with the motion. There was this bard, Jasier Dandelions, if you can believe it, and he put all the other archers to shame. Every shot, bullseye, not even the knights stood a chance. Sir Gawain said it was sorcery, but I think it was luck. Or maybe both. Rhaenys grinned. And flair. He had so much flair. You'd have loved him. He even split an arrow right down the middle. Have you ever seen someone do that? The whole crowd gasped. They were both glowing with excitement, talking over each other, giddy in the way only girls too clever and too bored can be when something finally surprises them. I sank into a cushion and waved a hand, calm and measured. Sounds impressive. But I had other matters. That made them blink. Other matters. Elise tilted her head, skeptical. More important than attending your own name day. I will be leaving King's Landing soon, I said smoothly, bringing back some sadness to both girls. Some things can't be ignored. Besides, I made sure not to be gone long. I offered a faint, knowing smile. You both covered for me admirably. Though truth be told, from what you two just told me I doubt anyone noticed my absence with such a spectacle going on. That distracted them just enough for me to reach for the satchel hidden beneath my cloak and draw the crossbow out, careful to keep it out of sight from anyone but us three. It was small, a hand crossbow, compact and deadly, but every inch of it screamed masterwork. Dragonbone, polished and dark like obsidian and ivory, formed the stock. The lever mechanism had been reinforced with delicate cohoric steel, arched just enough to ensure smoother reloads. The string gleamed like a raven's wing under torchlight, taut with precision. They both fell silent. Rhaenys leaned forward first, lips parted in awe. Where did you get that? Elise breathed, stepping closer. Had it commissioned. A private gift. From a very discreet craftsman in the city. I ran a thumb across the dragonbone, feigning nonchalance for Elise's sake, while Rhaenys, more aware of that part of my secrets, watched in silence, already guessing its connection to the stranger's cult from Flea Bottom. And it works? Rhaenys asked, already sounding like she wanted to test it for herself. Oh yes, I murmured. Perfectly balanced. More reliable than a longbow in close quarters. More subtle, too. They stopped talking about Jasier and my mysterious absence after that, now distracted by newly acquired masterfully crafted weapon, just as I allowed myself a small smirk. Tobo Mott had certainly outdone himself, again. I'd visited him under disguise just that morning, a false face and a new name, careful not to leave a trail. This crossbow had been one of few secret requests like my dragonbone clubs and bucklers that were presented to the most devout amongst the followers of my cult of the stranger. But it wasn't the only treasure got from him today. The armor, I could still feel its weight distributed across my body, packed beneath layers, the first time I tried it, now safely secured in my inventory. Interlocked rings forged tighter than most smiths bothered to make, sewn between layers of quilted padding. A hidden shirt of mail, quiet and efficient. Aside from its size now being a better fit for an adult body, it wasn't that much different than the first one I had to leave behind during my second exploration of the instant dungeon of the Red Keep. Though the chest plate piece was new. Shaped steel, reinforced with supple leather, merging well with the chain shirt while keeping it molded for movement and silence. AC 16 breastplate armor. Outstanding. And all of it was without taking into consideration the bonus I got from my Dragonbone buckler shield and the reaction I got from my defensive duelist feat. That's a theoretical armor class of 22. Freaking insane. So, after finally convincing my two close friends and still unaware party members that I still had more matters to deal with but would certainly stay around to witness the jousting, I left looking for somewhere I could secretly shift back to my Jasier persona and properly equip myself with my new set of armor. Later on, as I made my way toward the registration line for the melee, I quickly noticed it was even more crowded than the archery competition. There were easily close to 300 participants. Most had brought their own weapons and armor, many looking like they had just walked off the battlefield or out of a tavern fight. From where I stood, I caught glimpses of all manner of weapons: warhammers, longswords, broadswords, maces, battle axes, daggers, and even a few improvised tools with sharpened ends. Some boar belts lined with throwing knives, javelins, or small hatchets meant for hurling. Each man had come ready to carve out their place in history, or die trying. The sheer diversity of the crowd was striking. There were youths with gleaming swords fresh from the forge, and older men with notched axes and tired eyes. Wide-eyed peasants clutching second-hand gear stood beside grizzled squires and cocksure hedge knights. Many had brought their own shields and full armor, while others wore boiled leather or mismatched pieces scavenged from God's new wear. Those without proper defense already stood at a marked disadvantage. The combatants had been directed to a wide holding area just outside the arena. A long tent lined with benches, weapon racks, and buckets of water while most seats were already claimed. As I walked in, a dozen pairs of eyes turned to me, sizing me up. They saw the silk first, black and elegant, untouched by blood or dust. Then they noticed the lack of a proper breastplate, or any visible armor at all. Let them stare. You'd better believe I spent one of my precious arcane points in my disguise self-spell to complete the effect. Jasier, the bard with divine aim, strolling into the melee tent in high fashion, clad in supple black leather and embroidered silk. I wasn't just here to fight, I was here to make an impression. Ignoring the stares, I soon sat down on one of the emptier benches. With some subtle sleight of hand, I retrieved without anyone noticing my Dragonbone club and buckler from my inventory, one in each hand. No flash of Valyrian steel for this event, too much attention, and not the kind I wanted. The club and shield, however, would serve a dual purpose, functional enough for combat, and a quiet symbol to any nearby zealots of the stranger's faithful followers hidden among the crowd. Time for my second victory today, I thought as I twirled the Dragonbone club in one hand, letting it spin lazily in a flourish, half for the show, half to reacquaint myself with its weight and balance. I will be doing quite a lot of parrying with it soon. You're not fond of armor, are you? A voice came from nearby. How about your life? Turning, I was presented to a man in his early 30s, clean-shaven head, thick neck, and the unmistakable glint of red enamel on the accents of his armor. His mail was fine, interlocked rings sewn over quilted fabric, reinforced at the joints and weighed just right to absorb a good beating. It was a smith's masterpiece, no doubt customized to his liking. He looked like a warrior priest from a fever dream. A red priest, maybe, but not like the usual kind with holy chants and dead eyes. This one stank of wine, sweat, and last night's brothel. You know, he went on, eyeing me up and down, a man can live without his hands, maybe even a foot or two. But a blade through the chest. Doesn't matter how famous you are, down you go. I shook my head and shrugged. Wasn't satisfied with my current set yet, so I left the main segment of it unfinished. Besides, I smiled, it makes things a little more fair for the others. He barked a laugh and sat down beside me. You wear your own craft when it meets your standards. I like that. This is a man's game, after all. If you're afraid of dying, better leave now before someone makes the decision for you. Thanks for the compliment, and the warning, but I'll be fine. He nodded, then started oiling his sword with a practiced hand, coating the steel in a glossy sheen of greenish liquid. So what's your deal, Aerominstrel? Please, just call me Jasier. I offered a warm, casual tone, already recognizing the man despite the haze of alcohol and theatrics. And you? The name's Thoros, of Myr, as most folks insist on saying. Just a red priest with a sword and a thirst for 15,000 gold dragons. He grinned and extended a hand, which I shook before he asked me while uncorking his wineskin, ready for another generous swig. You're the one from the archery contest, right? Would have been funnier if you brought your bow. Not that they'd let you use it in a melee. I did consider asking for a special ruling. I said, standing up. But I decided I'd rather win their game, not bend them into mine. Thoros chuckled. Fair enough. But, if you do pull off another miracle in there, any chance you'd forfeit the prize again for second place? He added with a wink. Oh, and spoil the spirit of healthy competition. What kind of performer do you take me for? I said with mock offense. But fair warning, I don't intend to lose. You are one peculiar individual, you know, Bard. He said, laughing before going back to his wine. Look who's talking, cleric of Relore. I shot back with a smirk, stepping away and blending into the crowd as the officials began organizing the match. 300 contestants turned toward a raised platform, where 3 judges collected names and went over the rules. The melee was simple in structure, brutal in execution. The first round would be a mass elimination. All 300 would enter the arena at once and fight until only 8 remained standing. Those 8 would then draw lots and face each other in single combat. One-on-one duels until there was one left standing to claim the grand prize, 15,000 gold dragons. It was an elegant system, really. Efficient. Brutal. Honest in its own bloody way. The free-for-all was designed to weed out the weak and foolish. Anyone too slow, too proud, too soft, would be trampled, beaten, or stabbed within minutes. But survival wouldn't go only to the strongest, it would go to the smartest. The ones who knew when to strike and when to hide. The ones who made allies quickly and shed them even quicker. But perhaps I could have it go even quicker since I was running on a fixed schedule thanks to my disguise self's illusion that hid my armor being limited to an hour and my reserves of arcane points were still very limited. They soon divided us into 4 massive groups and sent us behind 4 separate gates leading into the arena. The arena itself was immense, easily several times larger than the archery field. The dirt and sand floor had already been churned by countless practice duels, and the 3-meter-high wall circling the battlefield kept both fighters and spectators safe from each other. The common folk in the lower stands would struggle to see much of the action. But the highborns in the royal pavilion, they'd have a perfect view. I glanced upward, eyes scanning the noble gallery until I found the royal box and the separate piece reserved for me while everyone else seemed to forget about whose name day this tourney was really meant to celebrate. Regardless, there they were, Rhaenys and Elise, eyes locked on the arena, undoubtedly holding their breath in anticipation. Waiting. Watching. This wasn't just a mere battle, but a performance. And I was ready to give them another show they'd never forget. As I mentally prepared myself for what was about to happen, I couldn't help but notice someone speaking to me. Ha 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 ha. Are you that desperate to enter a melee without proper armor? Don't tell me you couldn't afford the most important piece of it. Boomed a gruff voice behind me. The speaker was a tower of a man, thick-armed and red-faced, gripping a notched battle axe. His beard spilled onto the rivets of his mail shirt, and the sour tang of wine clung to him like a second skin. I can't believe you thought this was a good idea, singer. Ha ha ha. His mocking laughter drew chuckles from a few others. You're so green I can still smell your mother's milk on you. Of course one of these types would be part of my group. I exhaled slowly before finally answering. Is that jealousy I hear? I tilted my head with a smirk beneath my helmet. With a face like yours, I'd wager your mother abandoned you the moment she saw you. Probably pissed herself doing it, too. The laughter stopped. He loomed over me, eyes narrowing. Mind your tongue, pretty boy, or you'll die worse than we planned. I crossed my arms, voice light. Oh no, I'm trembling. Especially with a horse-slaying axe like that one. I looked at the axe again before looking back down at the man, subtly lacing my words with the casting of my vicious mockery cantrip. It's so large, I almost admire it, but do tell me, old man, are you compensating for something that's lacking? -1 HP. He fumbled for a retort, face twitching if he had just been slapped. Why, you're dead meat. Behind the helm, I grinned while few others were laughing at him now. But I chose to ignore him after that. He was too busy recovering from the mental sting of psychic damage my words delivered. Fortunately, I didn't have long to wait. The gate shuddered and parted, blinding light pouring through the widening crack. Then came the roar, shouts of fury, joy, and raw anticipation as the melee spilled onto the field like a dam bursting. Within moments, the arena became a storm of steel and shrieking voices. The stands erupted in cheers and gasps as blood hit the dirt. Killings weren't encouraged, but they weren't exactly banned either, and I could feel dozens of eyes zero in on me. There would be easy mark. Let them try, were my daring thoughts expressed through my bold smile. Soon I found myself darting between skirmishes, my movement swift and unpredictable as I focused entirely on avoiding stray attacks, casting my shillelagh cantrip with the subtlest flick of my fingers once I had the breathing room. My dragonbone club thrummed with raw primal power, turning the modest weapon into what felt like a juggernaut in my hands. Kept moving, evading blows, ducking behind locked combatants to explore the fog of war, analyzing. Until I finally came across him, my loudmouthed friend from before. You're a dead man, he roared, not all that creative with his threats, before charging straight at me, axe lifted for a murderous downward blow. I merely sighed, not in fear, but boredom. Casually sidestepping the clumsy attack, my club flicked out to parry as the man's own momentum staggered him. Quickly activating my steady aim feature, I planted my heels and unleashed a punishing strike. Sneak attack. Critical hit. Minus 36 HP. Crack. The weak spot of his armor folded like thin tin as he immediately gasped when his ribs gave way beneath the blow. But with my extra attack, I struck again, less forceful, more precise to capitalize upon my opponent's recently dealt wounds, now snapping bone just above the hip. Minus 18 HP. The brutish hedge knight didn't retreat, too stupid or too proud, maybe both. As he attempted again to swing his two-handed weapon at me, I found it even easier to parry with both club and buckler before knocking him out. This time, shattering his kneecap and dropping him with a final, ringing crack to the helm. Sneak attack. Minus 25 HP. Minus 8 HP. A bit of an overkill I know, but at least I left him still breathing. He wouldn't be getting up though. Some nearby fighters gave me a wide berth after that. Others, less wise, saw only a flashy weapon and my lack of armor, and decided to try their luck. Bad luck for them. I made use of the chaos, striking from unexpected angles when I could find someone distracted, or simply letting my footwork do the work. My baton-like club smashed through poorly made helms, cracked shields, and crushed ribcages. The primal magic sang with every hit. The blood wasn't something I relished, but I didn't shy from it either. Let others gasp and cry out in horror, I had a point to make. A few fights in, I kept the same proven strategy of parrying and rolling like some sort of From Software game protagonist, trading sneak for shock, dancing between offense and defense. Once, I spotted a towering brute, tall enough to draw crowd whispers and make others competitors avoid him. Not quite the mountain, not even the hound, but close enough to be a front runner. This stage of the competition was the perfect opportunity to take out those I wasn't entirely confident that I could take in a fair fight, so I charged him as soon as he gave me his back. His surprise cost him dearly, for not only was I in my element, but also because the tall man took some beating while carving his way through several men. My dark and iron-heavy dragonbone club clashed twice against the man's helm, and thanks to a near-impossible double critical hits combo I managed to render the man unconscious with my impacts powerful enough to thrash the piece of armor guarding his head. Sneak attack. Critical hit. Minus 32 HP. Critical hit. Minus 16 HP. His helm dented in with the second strike just as the tall knight crumpled. Before I could celebrate my success in eliminating the competition, a second later, I felt danger behind me. Didn't have time to turn, so I shifted, letting uncanny dodge blunt the strike. Minus 4 HP. Health points. 13/17. Then I spun, low and fast, and brought the dragonbone club crashing into the attacker's jaw. Bone cracked like dry wood and the man collapsed in a heap once I brought my weapon back in the opposite direction of my previous blow. That was close, I thought while inspecting the wound that I just received, immediately understanding that I wasn't the only one planning to take out the competition. This melee allowed me to learn firsthand just how many idiots screamed before attacking, helpful for me, less so for them. But I should have stayed wary, for the silent ones were the true danger. Still, I tore through them whenever the odds were in my favor. I wasn't just fighting for myself, mind you. When I saw young squires flailing, I gave them support, took down their tormentors, and sometimes, when no one was looking, gave them a taste of my heroism spell. Just enough to stop them from fleeing in shame, and to persuade them to help me take down the still remaining front runners. Giving the crowd something more for them to whisper amongst themselves, I let some minor lord's son remember my face. At least the face that I had crafted for my Jasier persona. Eventually, half the field was down, dead, unconscious, or too broken to stand. That finally gave me some breathing room to recast my shillelagh cantrip as its effect has once again ended. Once done, I hoisted the club over my shoulder, letting the light catch the iron dark grain. The crowd cheered, a particularly excited woman screamed my name. Or a name, at least, I couldn't hear clearly with everyone else cheering for me. Then I saw him. Tall, lean, and fast. A spear in one hand, a short sword in the other. He spun like a dancer, keeping his foes at bay with graceful, practiced strikes. Not efficient, much less safe. But it worked, for now. I darted forward, ducking behind the laid-down bodies of surrendered fighters and screams of the broken, sprinting low to the ground until I reached striking distance. My target once again didn't see me until it was far too late. For my club struck his shin with surgical precision, dropping him to the ground with a cunning strike. Just as the man gasped for air, my small dragonbone club came swinging like a golf club, right across the man's face. Teeth flew and blood followed as my target stopped twitching and his limbs went still, dropping both his weapons unceremoniously into the ground. I stood above him, breathing a bit heavy, club dripping before I raised both arms to the sky and bellowed to the watching crowd. Are you not entertained? The stands erupted, not in anger for my underhanded tactics, but mad excited for I knew at least how to put up a show for them, proven by the few random shouts I managed to make out amidst the chaos. Did you see that? The bonebreaker bard just shattered another one. The dancing stranger is at it again. Beware the bear knight. The bloody balladeer leaves 'em all crawling. Outside of the Mixpav. Meanwhile, while the battles raged on down below, the nobles kept watching from their pavilion and had their own thoughts about what they were witnessing. The seven have mercy, that minstrel is unstoppable. Hoster Tully exclaimed, rising halfway from his seat to get a better look while his daughter Lisa seemed to be appalled by everything. He's moving so fast it makes sense now why he came in without full armor. It wasn't madness, it was part of his plan all along. Even Hoster's brother, Esser Bryndon Tully, the Blackfish himself, had to nod in agreement, eyes sharp with the glint of a seasoned warrior recognizing something rare. The pavilion, once echoing with idle chatter and polite clapping since the end of the archery competition, had fallen quiet before roaring back to life, louder than ever. The crowd could barely take their eyes off the whirlwind of violence and cunning that was Jasier Dandelions. That he had won the archery contest was indeed impressive, but somewhat understandable. But how he was now dancing through blood and steel in the melee with such brutal precision was unheard of. King Robert laughed, wine spilling down his chin as he slapped his knee. Ha! Look at him. Gods, I could have used a dozen like him during the rebellion. John Arryn, standing calmly by the royal seat, smiled at the king's enthusiasm. Indeed, Your Grace, I haven't seen such ferocity since the war. Wouldn't you say so, Your Grace? Robert barked another laugh, raising his goblet. Yes, Ned would have liked him. John allowed himself a quiet chuckle and a knowing shake of the head. No, he wouldn't. At that, Cersei Lannister rolled her eyes and turned away from her husband, barely hiding her annoyance. His drunken mention of House Stark grated on her ears like sand on silk, but even she couldn't deny that the melee had become more entertaining than she'd expected. The minstrel, or whatever he truly was, moved like a man born of both violence and theater. The queen could see the crowd eating it up. Not since Jaime first took up his sword had a fighter so young drawn so many eyes at once. But even her golden twin had never chosen to fight like this, swarmed, surrounded, bleeding, yet still performing. Further down the row, Tyrion Lannister sipped from his own goblet and smirked. Father's going to trip over himself recruiting this one. He tilted his head, watching another skull-crushing blow land. A bard with bones of steel. That'll make quite the addition to our repertoire of terror, especially if he knows the reigns of Castamer by heart. A few rows down, Esser Jaime Lannister watched in silence, his eyes narrowed in thought. Beside him, Esser Barristan Selmy leaned forward, fingers folded before his lips. As Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Barristan had spent decades sifting through boys and men for a glimmer of greatness. It was rare, precious, and this boy, no, this man, was unmistakably touched by it. Jaime saw it too. The instinct, the timing, the ferocity wrapped in wit. He's dangerous, there was no doubt in that. And yet, the Kingslayer couldn't help himself from smiling. Because deep down, he relished the idea of crossing blades with this skilled balladmonger. Not out of jealousy, he told himself, but curiosity. Let's see if you're a flash of lightning, bard, or a storm that stays. All the way across the pavilion, near the Dornish delegation, Arianne Martell gripped her hands together as she leaned forward, watching every move. The way Jasier shattered helmets like they were clay. The way he turned his hips before every strike, dancing through death like a blade himself. He scared her, not because he was cruel, but because he was so sure and casual about all of it. So calm amidst chaos. It made her heart thump in a way no courtly suitor had ever managed. Beside her, Tyenne's hand fluttered toward her mouth. Oh gods, he's brutal. I think that man is dead. Of course he's dead, barked Obara, practically climbing over the rail. The bard smacked him so hard his helmet flew off. Did you see that? Nymeria, meanwhile, only smiled sweetly, a glint of mischief dancing in her eyes. Such fury, she murmured, almost wistful. Imagine if he could channel it into places other than the battlefield. Arianne didn't answer her cousin's teasing, for she didn't actually hear it. Her eyes were on the man beneath the grime, the streaks of blood, mud and rust. There was something wild about him. Something special. The way his muscles coiled and shifted as he dodged and struck reminded her of the Dornish tales she heard after the rebellion was over, of how the demon of the trident carved his path towards the Iron Throne before stealing it from the Targaryens. There was a kind of madness in him. Or maybe brilliance. And she trembled, unsure if it was from fear, or something far more dangerous. Ariane swallowed, breath catching as another man fell. Whatever he was, she knew she wouldn't be able to look away. Durrandon Baratheon's POV. The preliminary round was nearing its end, only 10 fighters remained standing. 290 men littered the field, groaning in pain or lying still in death. The wounded vastly outnumbered the dead, but the latter left a harsher silence in their wake. Weapons lay abandoned everywhere, warhammers, swords, maces, spears, like the corpses of beasts no longer tamed. Their former wielders could not claim them now. The field itself had become treacherous, scattered with steel and strewn with blood. Maces acted like spiked caltrops, ready to twist ankles. Warhammers lay like anchors to drag a man down. And then, there was the blood. It was everywhere, pooled around the fallen, sprayed on the walls like grotesque murals. Every man still standing wore some shade of red, whether his own or another's. This melee had long since passed the expected quota of violence. It had become something else entirely. I stood alone, much like 7 of the others, spaced out from the crowd. We were circling now, like wolves watching a pair of lions tear into each other. All eyes were on the duel. One wielded a heavy warhammer, his red hair now plastered to his scalp with sweat. He fought with raw power, but his swings were slower now. The other, barely a man, with sandy brown hair and a tall, lean build, danced around him like smoke. He fought with a spear, all precision and poise. Demon Sand, they called him, a Dornish bastard. And a talented one at that. I took the moment to steady my breath, letting the surge of second wind push through my limbs and refill some of my fraying health bar. I knew I had minutes, maybe seconds, before my disguise self-illusion faded and everyone witnessed my set of breastplate armor coming out for everyone to see. The others were waiting for the duel to end before they pounced, it was obvious. I could see them already shifting their footing, eyes angled not at each other but at the victor-to-be. Whoever survived the duel would be tired, winded and bleeding. An easy kill before ending this round of the melee. One of them was Thoros of Myr, the red priest that greeted me before the start of the competition. He'd lasted this long with that flaming sword of his, cutting through men like parchment, to the point even I knew better to keep my distance. Didn't matter now, I was ready even if I had to face him. Suddenly, a piercing cry cut through the arena as the red-haired hammerman dropped his weapon once Demon's spear found his shoulder. The point slid in clean and fast, then back out in a burst of blood. The big man fell to his knees, gasping and yielded. 10 became 9. One more had to fall. Well, I stepped forward right before the poor Dornish bastard got attacked from all fronts and began, voice low and steady, before the vultures could descend. Before we get started, does anyone want to get out now? 8 sets of eyes turned toward me. Even Demon Sand, breath still heavy, turned from his wounded opponent to look. I met their gazes without blinking. If one of you surrenders now, I said. No one else needs to bleed before the next round. A burly man with rotten teeth grinned, thinking he'd snuck up behind me, spinning his battle axe once, hungry for a cheap kill. The only one who's gonna be hurting is you. Get him, barked another, more willing to risk his chances on the still recovering Dornish bastard. He can barely stand. And then the wolves lunged. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement from the pavilion, Ariane Martell rising from her seat, leaning over the rail. I caught a glimpse of her hands clutching the wood, of genuine fear in her eyes. Pretty girls worrying about me, how quaint. I thought before the moment passed. Shifting in reaction to the strike from behind, pivoting low, knees bent, club held firm at my hip, I kicked off the ground in a quick burst, light and fast. My body moved before my mind finished thinking. You're all full of openings. I muttered as steel missed me by inches. My counterstrikes landed where previous wounds had already been carved from previous clashes. Elbows, ribs and hamstrings, they buckled fast. Simultaneously, I saw the rest of them rushing towards Demon. The young bastard was still winded, he wouldn't be able to block all of them at once. Quickly activating my action surge, I let my dragonbone buckler drop from my left arm mid-motion, doing my best to pretend on drawing a hidden weapon as I pulled arcane threads together into a stem I had picked from my pouch. My sleight of hand and deception skills on top of reliable talent helped mask the motion. Finally, everyone saw a black thorned whip burst from my palm like a serpent of brambles, thorn whip cantrip. It lashed at the leader of the would-be attackers and yanked him back several feet before I pretended to store away this hidden weapon of mine, surprise written all over everyone's face as the other competitors hesitated. Not for long, since my opponent from before was still standing. Without the buckler shield made of dragonbone, my guard was open, proven by how I felt one blow slamming into my shoulder. I rolled with it, gritting my teeth while activating uncanny dodge mid-motion to absorb the brunt of the strike. -5 HP. Health points. 12/17. Pain sang through my arm, but my club sang louder. My first blow once again exploited my opponent's injuries, but my second strike shattered his jaw, teeth flying like rice from a wedding toss. And then, fortunately, I was allowed to recover in silence, for the round was over. The crowd was cheering, now louder than before, maybe louder than they had all day, but I could barely hear it. My right arm throbbed, muscle and bone aching from impact after impact, blood and sweat running down to my fingers. Still, I remained standing. Exhausted. Constitution check failed. 1 level of exhaustion gained. Sadly, yes. But standing. And as the crowd roared, and the nobles rose to their feet, just as I found myself smiling for all to see once I removed my helmet. My smile wasn't just because of the response I got from everyone, but primarily due to the ping I got from my system, followed by notifications worth more than any reward I could get from winning whatever competition this tourney might throw at me. The 10th of August 2021. The 24th of April 2022. The 1st of January 2025. Hope this chapter is of your liking. Anything you wish to ask, feel free to do so. Check out my auxiliary chapter if you still haven't. Thanks as always for your attention and please be safe. Any problems with my writing, just point them out and I will correct them as soon as possible. Your gift is the motivation for my creation. Give me more motivation. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Vote for me. I tagged this book, come and support me with a thumbs up. Like it, add to library, have some idea about my story. Comment it and let me know. Daichi_TBR 193 creators, thoughts. 48 comments 0 vote. The Self-Belief Cleric and the Champion's Prize. DURRANDON Baratheon's POV. The system pinged alive before my eyes like a waterfall of rewards. Class Progress Update. Glamour, Rank C. Font of Inspiration. You now regain all your expended uses of Bardic Inspiration when you finish a short or long rest. In addition, you can expend 2 spell points to regain 1 expended use of Bardic Inspiration. My continuous effort in enthralling my audience through every step and move I made had thankfully paid off. Lovely. More songs, more lies, and now I could refill my inspiring tricks over a few mugs of ale instead of a full night of sleep. Divine points. 6 right pointing arrow 14, max tier, 1 right pointing arrow 2. Second tier divine spells unlocked. Suggestion Phantasmal Force. Always good to keep enhancing my magic. Whispers strong enough to bend wills or plant nightmares. Good for my friends. Even worse for my enemies. And that wasn't all. Another cascade of notifications followed. Class Progress Update. Assassin Rank B. Infiltration Expertise. You are expert at posing as someone else to aid your infiltration. While in a disguise aided by the use of your disguise kit, you have advantage on any charisma deception check you make while pretending to be someone else. You can also unerringly mimic another person's speech, handwriting, or both if you have spent at least 1 hour studying each one. Roving Aim. Your speed isn't reduced to 0 by using steady aim. To be honest, I expected that all those challenges of marksmanship and carefully picking on my targets during the small battle that was the melee would lead me to raise my hunter class instead. But I won't complain. It was still excellent. Not only have I boosted the effectiveness of my Mask of the Changeling, now I could keep focusing on my aim for the next strike and not sacrifice my mobility while doing it. Outstanding progress. But the system wasn't finished yet. Class Progress Update. Champion, Rank C. Tactical Shift. Whenever you expend a use of your second wind, you can move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. Interesting, that ability had admittedly been a back burner amongst all my options during combat up till now. With this upgrade I could more reliably heal myself while getting some breathing room between my opponents. Hadn't done it before because usually most of my regained HP would just go to waste once an opponent found another gap in my defenses. This on top of my momentarily extra boost of speed after every critical hit was pushing me into becoming a target very hard for my enemies to pin down. Error. Non-stackable and redundant feature located. New origin feat selected accordingly to your actions up to this point. Wait, what? Origin feat? Haven't heard about it since my first years as a toddler. Alert origin feat unlocked. Always on the lookout for danger, you gain the following benefits. Initiative proficiency. When you roll initiative, you can add your proficiency bonus to the roll. Initiative swap. Immediately after you roll initiative, you can swap your initiative with the initiative of one willing ally in the same combat. You can't make this swap if you or the ally has the incapacitated condition. Alertness. You can't be surprised at the start of any sudden combat while you are conscious. And other creatures don't gain advantage on attack rolls against you as a result of being unseen by you. Wow, not as amazing as the usual general feats that help increase my attribute stats, but still might come in clutch just as my lucky feat so oftenly does. Regardless, just as the deluge of notifications ended, I managed to hear the judges call out from the center of the arena. By the decree of King Robert Baratheon, the final contenders are granted an hour's rest. The man's voice rang out, amplified by the sudden silence everyone else made. Tend your wounds. Sharpen your steel. The final rounds will resume after. Cheers rolled again from the stands. The still standing fighters, myself included, began to stagger toward the shade of the arena walls or toward the apprentices of maesters moving hesitantly onto the blood-stained field. It was only after spending the next hour doing nothing but light activity and recovering all my HP with my last use of second wind that the next ping from the system popped up like a smug reminder. You have taken a short rest. You may have another short rest before requiring to take a long one. Action surge use restored. 1 second wind use restored. A slow grin tugged at my mouth as I finished cleaning my breastplate armor so it didn't appear to have accompanied me through the first stage of the melee, especially now that my disguise self-spell had ended and I had no extra arcane points remaining to recast it. A deep breath filled my lungs. The throbbing ache of my arm dulled, receding under the touch of whatever silent magic stitched me back together during the use of my second wind. I rolled my shoulders experimentally. Good enough. Not perfect, the exhaustion level still weighed on me like a chain around my ribs, but manageable enough. As the cheers rang out and I could hear even the nobles shouting for blood and glory, I glanced across the remaining fighters resting alongside me. Thoros of Myr wiped wine from his mouth, grinning like a madman. Demon Sand, pride smoldering in his dark eyes despite his young age, straightened slowly. So this is it, I thought, finishing stretching my body and reading myself for the final acts of my performance to all the people of King's Landing. The field had now shrunk to a stage, for only 8 men stood. No more, no less. Across the broken ground, dark with blood, scattered with shards of armor and snapped-off weapons, we were herded into a wide circle, facing each other under the less brutal afternoon sun. My new breastplate caught the light, a gleaming shell over the deep black of my gambeson, each movement I made gleaming sharp against the dirt and wreckage around us. The crowd had stilled themselves into silence, thousands of hearts beating faster as thousands of mouths held their breath. This was no longer chaos, no longer a brawl fought in the churn of desperation. It had become a tournament of executions. And in knowing that, I let the weight of the moment settle into my bones, steadying my breath. Calm, focused, calculating. The others shifted, tightened grips on weapons, rolled shoulders, adjusted stances. Most of them fought their nerves, but I didn't. I was ready. The judges stepped forward, voice carrying with practiced authority. Finalists of the Great Melee of King's Landing. You shall now fight in duels. Victory or surrender, until only one remains. They eventually barked the first names, and fate chose for me. The same fool I had struck with Thornwhip in the preliminary round, the one who had barked for others to rush Demon Sand, staggered forward. His skin was still healing from the lash, his pride clearly less so. A thick-set man, broad-chested, armor dented and bloodied, axe already glinting red under the sun. He scowled when he saw me. I'll break you for whipping me like a damn horse, poet. He snarled, spitting blood into the dirt at his feet. Armor or no? The crowd roared, but it sounded distant to me, muffled by my heartbeat and readying footsteps as I shifted my stance, steadying my now roving aim. He lunged, greedy for blood. Despite my quicker reflexes, I let him believe he was dictating the rhythm of our battle. His strike came high and sloppy, telegraphed from a mile away. I slipped aside with a dancer's grace, the hem of my gambeson fluttering from beneath the solid gleam of my breastplate as he crashed past me. True strike sharpened my focus. My club came up fast, a blur of motion, slamming into the inside of his elbow with a dull crack just as I performed one of my cunning strikes. Sneak attack. -20 HP. His axe clattered to the ground, swallowed by the mud. Before he could recover, I moved again, mage's bracers lending speed to the divining ritual of my strikes. Another flash of true strike, aimed precisely at the already damaged joint. -19 HP. He snarled and swung a fist in desperation. My shield flicked out in a blur, catching it before it gained momentum. My club parried his other hand away, as easy as batting aside a child's blow. He bellowed, staggered, half falling, perfect. I casually stepped past his guard in one smooth, almost lazy motion, and drove the butt of my club into his gut. The air exploded from his lungs in a sickly bark. -21 HP. He crumpled to his knees, gasping like a fish on dry land. Before he could even think of yielding, I spun the club once through my fingers and wrapped him neatly across the temple. Minus 16 HP. He pitched forward, face first into the dirt, unmoving. Once the crowd erupted, I exhaled slowly, shaking the tension from my wrist, club swinging loose and easy at my side. No wasted breath, no wasted movement. I was clean, precise and dominant. Exactly the way I needed them all to see me. Applause and whistles battered the air, hot and violent, while I lifted my chin slightly just as the judges barked for the next bout to be readied. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Ariane Martel at the pavilion, still leaning forward, knuckles white against the rail. There was heat in her gaze now. Not fear, but actual affection. The reckless, ambitious kind the young wore so easily. Good. Once I finished watching the other duels after mine, it became clear once only 4 of us remained, that the competition was finally nearing its end. Thoros of Myr was the only one who matched my theatrical display, soaking in the crowd's roars with the ease of a drunk soaking wine. But the others, forgettable, to put it mildly. Across the still blood-stained field, the judges barked the next pairing, and fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Demon Sand. Jasier Dandelions. The Dornish bastard didn't hesitate. He stepped forward like a man walking toward his own execution, spear gripped tightly in both hands, a thin smear of blood drying along his temple from his earlier fights. He wasn't just walking toward me, he was walking toward her. Ariane Martel. Still watching from the pavilion, still leaning forward like her very breath depended on the outcome. Yeah, it took me a while, but I soon noticed his quick glances towards her after every time he downed an opponent, or every time my performance stole her attention. Demon Sand had entered this melee for her. For a scrap of her attention. Maybe a kiss, a favor tied to his arm, the beginnings of a song sung in his name. But now, facing me, he understood, truly understood, just how outmatched he was. I saw it in the slight hitch of his steps. Saw it in the way his knuckles whitened around the spear. He knew, but still he came. Because boys with dreams built on sand don't get to turn back in front of a princess. And so, soon we both entered the circle. With Demon beginning to circle me immediately, wolfish, head low, seeking an opening that wasn't there. The crowd's roar blurred into a low, thrumming heartbeat in my ears. This was personal for him. A fight he couldn't afford to lose, even though he already had. Demon spun his spear with a flashy twist, baiting a reaction. But I gave him none. Instead, I let the club hang loose at my side, relaxed, inviting. A sneer twisted his mouth. No tricks this time, Aerominstrel. He spat, voice rough, baiting. To his annoyance I said nothing, letting him fill the silence with anger, letting him make mistakes for me to exploit. Not long after, Demon struck first, a fast, shallow jab meant to probe my defenses. To which I leaned aside easily, the tip of his spear slicing air inches from my leg. Good footwork and speed. If it weren't for the anger burning under his skin, he might have been dangerous. The real strike came next, a feint at my knee, followed by a vicious upswing aimed at my arm, hoping to cripple my club hand. A clever plan. Too bad for him, I didn't play by others' plans. Suddenly I stepped into the attack a heartbeat early, prompting his eyes to widen, realizing the mistake a bit too late, for my club came down hard across the shaft of his spear with a sharp crack, halting his momentum mid-swing. We grappled for a moment, spear locked against club, close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath. Despite the older frame my mask of the changeling gave me, underneath, I was still a boy, younger and weaker than Demon Sand. But strength alone doesn't win grapples, technique does. And I had that in spades, thanks to my expertise in athletic skill. Predictably, Demon cheated. His free hand darted for the knife hidden at his belt, silver flashing under the sun. The crowd gasped, but I was faster. A vicious snap kick caught his wrist, sending the blade spinning from his grasp. Before he could blink, I twisted, wrenching the spear clean from his hands and flinging it across the ring. For a heartbeat, we stood face to face, both empty-handed, breathing hard. I had clipped my club and shield to my waist with a casual, almost lazy motion, as if to say, "Come, let's see what you've got." His fists flew next, wild and undeniably angry. I ducked the first, slipped the second. Came up inside his guard and slammed my elbow into his jaw. Followed with a quick punch, snapping his head sideways. -1 HP. -1 HP. Yeah, I kinda suck at unarmed attacks. But at least I managed to not miss my punches thanks to my pendants of hindsight nudging things in my favor. This gave the impression that I was going easy on the young Dornish bastard. You know there's no shame in yielding. I said low, my voice meant for his ears only. You've already surpassed everyone's expectations. Better to bow out now than be dragged off like a broken fool. His lip curled. You would like that, wouldn't you? No, I'd rather he kept a shred of dignity. But I also understood that pride was louder than sense. So I let him stagger back. Let him feel the absence of his weapon, the suffocating weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on him. Let the rage build until it boiled over. And when he rushed me, reckless and raw, I was ready. One sidestep, followed by a brutal jab of my club into his ribs as I drew it clean from my waist. And finished with a sweeping trip that sent him sprawling face first into the dirt. Minus 20 HP. Minus 12 HP. He hit hard, coughing dust, the laughter of the crowd rolling over him like a breaking wave. That, more than any strike I could deliver, shattered him. Demon shoved himself to his knees, face burning crimson with humiliation. For a moment, I thought he might rise again, mad with shame. But instead, he tore his helmet off and hurled it aside. The meaning was unmistakable. Surrender. The competitor Demon Sand has yielded. The judges roared for all to hear. I didn't linger, didn't gloat, didn't smile. Just left him his pride. I had beat him clean, not dirty, despite that being my preferred style. Finally turning on my heel, I let the cheers of the crowd wash over me like a rising tide. As Demon Sand was led from the field, head bowed but shoulders stiff with pride he refused to shed, the murmur of the crowd grew louder, heavier, like a brewing storm. Whispers raced through the stands, a living thing, hungry and eager. The Bone Crusher has crushed another one's spirit. He's going to win the whole damn thing again. Did you see how he moved? Like a dancer on a stage, light as a feather and twice as sharp. Even the treacherous Dornish bastard couldn't land a blow. Their voices rolled over me like waves, but I kept my gaze steady, watching the judges out of the corner of my eye as they huddled together, conferring in low tones. Across the ring, the last light of the dying sun caught the battered armor of Thoros of Myr as he stepped forward, his grin broad and mad under a battered helm. The great sword in his hands burst into flames as if answering his unspoken challenge, the fire dancing bright and hungry, casting flickering shadows all around him. Arcana check failed. Damn, I just knew he did something more than just coating it on wildfire. I argued with myself, really curious about what sort of spell the non-believer Red Priest had casted without even knowing. Thoros soon lifted the burning blade in a warrior's salute, his booming voice carrying easily across the arena. Come then, Bard, let's give them a show they'll never forget. The final duel had begun and the heat rolling off Thoros' sword painted the air between us in wavering lines, thick and shimmering. Even from this distance, it was a living thing, wild and primal. Not nearly as suffocating as the unnatural heat I had faced clearing my first instant dungeon, that of the Mad Wraith's phantom sword, but still dangerous enough to demand my full attention. Perhaps even more, since I was bound to underestimate it due to the comparison. Regardless, the crowd had once again fallen deathly silent, with the tension thicker than summer humidity. I could feel that every eye was locked on us. I raised my dragonbone buckler, feeling the primal energy stitched into its core from my shillelagh cantrip hum quietly against the oppressive heat. Hidden beneath the leather wraps over my mage's bracers, tiny pendants of hindsight, my own careful handwork, pulsed faintly, ready to twist a second's bad luck into a saving grace. Thoros stalked closer, great sword held low like a torch in the hands of a mad prophet. You smell it, don't you, lad? He roared. The fire, the fight, the life. Look at the king up there, slowly drowning in silks and expensive wine, while we drink from the only cup that actually matters. He then suddenly lunged, fast. Far too fast for any drunkard priest. His first blow I barely caught on my buckler, the force rattling through my bones like a bell struck by a hammer. Crack. Flames exploded outward, a searing burst of heat washing over me. Minus 3 HP. Health points. 16/19. The natural fire-resistant properties woven into my dragonbone shield drank in the worst of it, but the raw impact still shoved me back a full step, my boots gouging lines into the dirt. Gasps rippled through the stands, a few screams cutting sharp through the thick tension. I slid sideways, keeping my profile narrow, minimizing the surface Thoros could target, letting my dragonbone equipment drink the next blow's heat like a stone splitting a raging tide. No wild counters, no reckless gambles. I had to be patient. Thoros was relentless, a hurricane of sweeping arcs and blistering heat. Each strike felt brighter, hotter, heavier. Each block made my bones sing with pain, the dragonbone shield thrumming like a living thing, unseen and unheard to anyone but me. I waited, searching for the rhythm beneath the chaos. 1, 2, 3, left, right, overhead. Then the moment he overcommitted, his weight too far forward, his greatsword swinging too high, exposing his side. I pivoted inside his reach, the flame licking past by a breath, and slammed my club into the hinge of his armor at the knee. Minus 22 HP. Thoros grunted, stumbling a half step, but the mad grin never left his face. He spun on me in a brutal backhand, the flat of his burning greatsword catching my buckler dead center. Crack crack crack. Minus 8 HP. Health points. 8/19. Splinters of regular steel flew like dying stars against the unyielding dragonbone. I staggered, half blind from the shockwave, while Thoros advanced with the inevitability of a falling star. This time, he didn't swing, he drove the burning blade straight down at my skull, no finesse, just overwhelming force. Forcing me no other choice, I braced my buckler and club together, catching the greatsword between them, teeth clenched against the searing agony. Sparks screamed into the air as magic and muscle warred. Minus 4 HP. Health points. 4/19. The heat blistered my skin, singing the tips of my hair. Sweat and ash filled my mouth. Still, I held and endured. Thoros' eyes widened a fraction, reading the truth of me in that instant. Good, he growled. Very good. And with a sudden twist, I rolled sideways, wrenching the sword out of alignment, away from my skull. The stress was too much and the greatsword shattered, snapping between my club and shield with a sound like the death scream of a dying titan. Thoros stumbled, momentarily unarmed. And that was my chance. I surged forward, every ounce of focus narrowing to a single point. My club hammered into his chest, guided by the clarity of true strike and steady aim. Sneak attack. Critical hit. Minus 59 HP. The impact knocked Thoros sprawling onto the dirt, a sound like a bellows-punched horse escaping his lungs. Smoke curled around us in lazy tendrils as I stood over him, my chest heaving, the last of my second wind refilling my battered body. Full health. Full fury. Thoros looked up at me, blood staining his teeth, a mad, proud grin splitting his scorched face. Without a word, he flung the shattered hilt of his sword aside, accepting defeat the way only true warriors could. Almost to the shock of my combat-focused mind, the arena exploded. A wall of noise hit me like a crashing wave, drowning everything else. The judges rushed forward, shouting, their voices blurred into the roar of the mob. My name, my nicknames, my victories, shouted again and again, whipped into a frenzy. The dancing stranger has defeated the Red Faith champion. The Seven be praised. Did you see how the darkness of his shield ate the flames that would have burned regular men? The Bomba Crusher bard doesn't break just bones, he will also shatter your steel if you don't let go of it. Victory. King Robert Baratheon himself rose from his seat, golden crown still glinting despite the sunset. His face was a storm of approval and wild pride, a king who lived for moments like this. And unbeknownst to all but me, a father that was proud of his firstborn son without knowing. The winner, he bellowed, his voice carrying across the packed stands like a warhorn. Jasier Dandelions, the bloody ballader. The applause struck like a hammer blow. A tidal wave of roars, stomps, and cheers crashed down from all sides, shaking the very stones of the arena. I bowed deeply, first to the judges, then to Thoros of Myr, who lay unconscious but grinning in his sleep as if dreaming of better days. Only after honoring the fallen did I turn to the sea of faces, lords and ladies, sellswords and merchants, smiths and beggars alike, all bound together for this fleeting heartbeat of triumph. My thanks to the good people of King's Landing. I called out, voice strained but steady, fighting to reach every ear. And to all the lords and ladies who have come from across the Seven Kingdoms. The crowd responded with another rolling cheer, and I lifted my club in salute, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. I drew a slow breath, tasting dust, sweat, and the heady spice of victory. But this wasn't just a fight I wanted remembered. No, this was a statement that should linger years after more tournaments came and go. And to honor this victory, I shouted, voice sharpening like a drawn blade. I claim the champion's prize of the melee, not for myself. A ripple of mild confusion ran through the stands, heads leaning forward, hands stalling mid-applause. I was about to do what none would have dreamed twice in a single day, I mean, besides winning 2 competitions. But for the families of Flea Bottom, for those whose lives have known only hunger and hardship, but who deserve more than the fate they were born to. May this small offering serve as a spark of dutifulness, of generosity, for every soul in this city who still dares to hope that King's Landing can be a place where the downtrodden can proudly call their home. A beat of stunned silence, then the storm broke, again for what felt 100th time that day. The roar that followed was deafening, not applause now but a raw, wordless cry, the sound of a city, however briefly, believing in something larger than itself. The sound of hearts catching fire and silent prayers of gratitude being poured to the seven above, more specifically to the stranger. Above it all, King Robert threw back his head and laughed, pounding a mighty fist against the rail in front of him, crown askew, pride blazing in his eyes. And as I stood there, soaked in blood, sweat, and rising smoke, I confirmed something. This, too, was a kind of battle. And for the first time that day, I had one without needing to break a single bone or shoot a single arrow. Finally, once the commotion had finally died down, one of the longest, and most joyful, days of my life in King's Landing was coming to an end. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a golden-orange shroud. Torches flickered to life along the streets, and the first sliver of the moon began to rise, pale against the deepening sky. Though the day had passed, the night was still young, and the ale flowed freely, hundreds of cups raised high, emptied, and refilled with abandon. Old and young alike flooded out of the inns and taverns, swept up in the revelry, celebrating the extraordinary outcome of the tourney so far. Young boys charged through the crowded streets, waving sticks like swords and calling out their new hero's name, their parents watching with pride-ridden plain on their faces. Across every corner of the city, the name on the lips of the common folk, murmured, shouted, sung, was the champion of both archery and melee. Their champion. A man who had bested the sons of lords and knights alike, and asked for nothing in return. Somehow, seven knows how, the number of noble competitors who had entered the tourney leaked to the streets. And now Jasier Dandelions had become a living legend to the lowborn, a lad from nowhere important who had outmatched over 100 highborns and dared to forfeit both of his rewards. 10,000 gold dragons from the archery contest had been gifted to Jalabar Exho, the exiled Summer Islander prince. 15,000 more, the melee prize, had been donated to improve Fleabottom itself. Songs and poems were already blooming like wildfire in the night, spread by eager young bards dreaming to follow his path, singing of a day when a commoner had risen higher than princes. The first crowd that swarmed me caught a few of my half-hearted answers, but soon 100 voices drowned me out, all shouting at once. It grew so wild I had to shove my way free, laughing, half-blinded by the press of bodies and the drunken roar of celebration. The city had been caught in a true fever, and I had to hurry back into the safety of my crown prince persona before I was torn apart by frantic, jubilant hands. At last, safely tucked behind my mask of royal aloofness, I had time to breathe, and to fully grasp what today meant. I gave a quick explanation to Elise and Rainey's, who, with no small amount of amusement, informed me that my father had nearly knighted the mysterious Jasier Dandelions on the spot, only for John Aaron to dissuade him, pointing out that such a fighter would likely prefer to earn his spurs in real battle. I finally slipped away into the safety of my instant dungeon and its blessed time dilation. There, at last, I took my well-earned long rest, sprawling out on the comfortable enough bedroll I had crafted using my Tinker's magic feature, grateful to avoid another constitution check against the exhaustion gnawing at my bones. Not only that, but I even had the luxury of preparing proper meals with my handy spice pouch and alchemy jug, feasting like a king inside my own personal domain. As well as made some repairs on my equipment with my mending cantrip. Still, there was one last project I needed to finish before the joust tomorrow morning, before I departed King's Landing with my grandfather, Tywin Lannister, to serve as his ward at Castle Rock. The impracticality of spellcasting had finally worn down my patience. Too many of my spells demanded strange little material components, a stem from a thorny plant for thornwhip and mistletoe for shillelagh for example, and keeping track of them all was fast becoming a nightmare. Fortunately, over the weeks, I had carefully pilfered pieces of the Alchemist Guildhall supplies, a glass beaker here, a stirring rod there, a frame, a mortar and pestle, common ingredients like salt, powdered iron, and purified water, until I had a serviceable collection to work with. It wasn't much compared to the loot I'd scored clearing instant dungeons, but it was enough. Enough to craft the thing I needed most, a magical item that would solve my material component problem once and for all. It took a few disappointing failures, and several frustrating hours of muttered curses and careful recalibration of my recipe. But eventually, with no small amount of help from my guidance cantrip, I finally succeeded in making some good use of my improvised alchemist supplies. The result was a small, watertight leather belt pouch, no larger than a man's fist, enchanted with tiny, intricate compartments capable of magically producing any costless material component I might need on demand. No need to dig through my inventory. No more risk of wasting space. No more wondering if I had packed that damned sprig of mistletoe. Was it flashy? No. Was it powerful? Hardly. But just like all my other creations, it was mine, a small, perfect victory, crafted with my own hands and magic understanding. Honestly, after all that work, I had hoped the system would acknowledge my ingenuity, maybe with a new feature or a little something extra. Ping. Hell yeah, I never doubted you, system. Class progress update. Artificer subclass, Alchemist rank D+. By constantly applying all of your energy and creativity into the development of wondrous items, you've proven yourself a student of the arcane that modifies both energy and matter. Alchemy is the oldest of artificer traditions, and its versatility has long been valued during times of war and peace. Some of these practitioners are tinkerers and pranksters, turning people into toads and transforming copper into silver for fun and occasional profit. Others pursue their magical studies with deadly seriousness, seeking the power of the gods to make and destroy worlds. Yeah, I'm more of the, I just want to bend and reshape reality to my will, kind of alchemist. But thanks for the promotion, I guess. Tool proficiency. You gain proficiency with alchemist supplies. In addition, when you brew a potion, the amount of time and cost required to craft it is halved. Look at me, becoming a discount potion vendor. Now all I need is a shady little cart and a bell to start hawking miracle cures at the market. Or jars full of pig shit, as Braun had once described the work of the alchemist. Right tool for the job. The list of items you can create with magical tinkering now includes artisan's tools. Whatever tool you create this way, you have proficiency with it when you use it. Finally, I was almost doubting that all the countless hours I secretly spent thoroughly studying all the tools used by both Tobo Mott and Haline after watching them use them all day long would end up paying dividends. Even Grand Maester Pycelle had found it a bit too odd for me to keep asking him about the correct handling of tools such as the ones used by cobblers and glassblowers. No more awkwardly pretending I know how to use painter's supplies to draw the images on the cards I created for my game. Aegon the Conqueror can finally rest easy that I will no longer draw him like an elementary school kid. Minor alchemy. You can now temporarily alter the physical properties of one non-magical object, changing it from one substance into another. By performing a special alchemical procedure on one object composed entirely of wood, stone but not a gemstone, iron, copper, or silver, transforming it into a different one of those materials. This transformation lasts for 1 hour unless you use your action to end it. You can use this ability a number of times equal to your intelligence bonus. You regain your expended uses when you complete a long rest. Great, now I can finally fix a broken chair by turning it into a broken rock. Truly, the pinnacle of magical innovation. I kid, of course. My mending cantrip already has that issue covered. But where this feature can indeed shine would be to turn my darts crafted from any cheap material into becoming obsidian and hopefully achieving the similar effect Dragonglass has on White Walkers. Arcane points. 2 right pointing arrow 6 max tier, 1. Ooh, 6 arcane points. I'm practically a low-budget sorcerer now that can cast illusions over his body for up to 3 hours now. Step aside, Gandalf. Sorry, I really don't know what's got into me. I'm not usually this sarcastic. My motto can sort of be summed up to, progress is progress, period. New arcane spells learned from subclass, Healing Word, Ray of Sickness asterisk. See, it's even better than I was giving it credit for. Congratulations. You have unlocked a new feat, Warcaster. You have practiced casting spells in the midst of combat, learning techniques that grant you the following benefits. Ability score increase. Your charisma score increases by 1. Concentration. You have advantage on constitution saving throws that you make to maintain your concentration. Reactive spell. When a creature provokes an opportunity attack from you by leaving your reach, you can react by casting a spell at the creature, rather than making a regular strike. The spell must have an instantaneous casting time and must target only that creature. Somatic components. You can perform the somatic components of spells even when you have weapons or a shield in one or both hands. So, let me get this straight. I'm officially stylish enough to throw spells mid-combat without dropping my shield or weapon. About damn time. Besides, the boost to my concentration is bound to come in handy when I'm being blasted from all sides. And the increase to my charisma attribute, if my calculations are correct, does that mean that I've just 20 plus 5. EXP Deception. Plus 1 Intimidation. Plus 7. EXP Performance. Plus 1 Pro Persuasion. Plus 8. Oh yeah, so this is what peak charm feels like. I'm now legally required to register as a walking charisma check. Ping. Secret quest completed. Make sure the people know your name. Win at least one of the competitions of your name day tournament, 2/1. Impress both nobles and small folk alike. Plant the seeds for the future of your cult. Max out your charisma attribute. Reward. Unlock a new class. What? Ping. Are you serious? New class acquired. Have you heard the call of the gods? Do you have faith in a higher power? Will you be an instrument for their divine will? You are now a cleric. Clerics are intermediaries between the mortal world and the distant planes of the gods. As varied as the gods they serve, clerics strive to embody the handiwork of their deities. No ordinary priest, a cleric is imbued with divine magic. Class features, cleric rank D. Abilities unlocked. Divine order. You have dedicated yourself to the following sacred role. Thaumaturge. You know 1 extra cantrip. In addition, your mystical connection to the divine grants you proficiency in the following skill: religion. Divine Full Caster, rank D, you have learned how to cast spells through prayer and meditation. Divine points. 14 to 18, max tier, 2. New cantrips learned. Light resistance, spare the dying, thaumaturgy. New spells learned. Bless Bane, guiding bolt, protection from evil and good. So, I'm a cleric now. Just like that. No vision. No angelic herald. No booming voice calling me, my child. Not even a burning bush or a talking goat. Just a notification from my system and a divine LinkedIn request from the heavens. But which heavens, exactly? I mean, fair enough, I've been using the stranger's name and image considerably more often than my own title as Crown Prince lately. Scaring criminals, whispering threats from the shadows, making the wicked kneel and drawing some prayers from the downtrodden. Even planting the seeds of some rumors to strengthen the influence of my fledgling cult during daylight while posing as my Jasier Dandelion's persona. It was bound to get some attention from the system. Still, out of all the gods in Westeros, the faith of the Seven wasn't exactly the one I was betting against being real, but neither was I holding my breath for some divine intervention anytime soon. Not just because their faith militant doctrine could lead to something just as bad as the Red God's heretic burnings or the Old God's creepy tree blood sacrifices, but because they've had literal centuries and haven't managed to show even a single miracle worthy of note in the books. No flames that speak of prophetic visions. No mind-stealing forest spirits. Not even a talking bird that quoted holy scripture, unless you counted Baylor the Blessed, a king some would argue was a different kind of mad. Just septons, taxes and the occasional high sparrow with a god complex that could topple a king if he didn't thread carefully. And yet here I am, magic flowing through my veins. Divine magic, similar to the one I wielded as a bard, but considerably more potent. If that's not ironic, I don't know what is. Though if I was going to worship someone, it would definitely be my dear game system. It's consistent, informative, and rewards my hard work. 3 things no god in this world has ever managed to pull off. Still, the spells I've learned from it were far from useless. As I raised my hand and tried to call one of my newest spells into being, I felt the magic was there. I could feel it, humming just below the skin and pulsating within my chest, hearing faint whispers of all the followers I've been able to convert to my cause. But to my surprise, it stalled. Hesitated. Waiting for permission. No, permission wasn't the right word. Recognition. I could still cast these divine acts of wonder, but they wouldn't be at their peak. Something shifted right as I heard a different kind of whisper behind my thoughts. Not quite words, not like the ones singing praises to my actions and hoping for my victory against my enemies, but one more like an instinct. A sense that the divine current now flowing through me wasn't entirely mine to command. Not unless I gave it shape and anchored it to something undeniably real. Right, of course. Divine magic plays by different rules than arcane or primal. Arcane power is precise. It obeys intellect and discipline. Equations, recipes and runes drawn just right. A magic of scholars, artificers, and any madman who might try to trap the universe in geometry. You don't just feel it, you must solve it. Primal power is wilder. It doesn't speak in glyphs or formulae, but in heartbeat and instinct. It hums in roots and rivers, in the tension of a bowstring, in the moment just before the kill. You don't just command it through logic, you must join it. The predator's hunger, the storm's fury, the forest's slow breath, that's where it lives. But divine magic isn't calculated or hunted. It's given. It answers belief, not necessarily in gods, but in purpose and in meaning. Divine power flows when you declare something is sacred and then act like it. It's conviction made manifest. A whisper with the weight of law that even when silent, it rings in the hearts and heads of others. So I finally understood what it required. This needed symbolism. An outward sign of inward fire. A symbol of my holy existence, if you will. To use it as a focus, I needed to hold it in hand, wear it visibly or simply bear it upon my shield. Well, good thing I always preferred a dramatic flourish. I told myself before turning my gaze toward the obsidian-hued dragonbone buckler still hanging over my waist. Time to give it a little upgrade. From my inventory, I pulled my Valyrian steel dagger since I knew precision mattered just as my intent. 7 points, stark and sharp. A star of the faith, but black as shadow. And at its lowest tip, a single line of crimson. Just enough to catch the light and suggest blood. The symbol of the stranger, my stranger. The one my recently converted believers created for me. No specific hymns, no singular oath, just quiet intent most of the time. I held the shield aloft. And this time, when I reached for the divine thread, I didn't need to wield, just believe in it. Power, regardless of its nature, when you first taste it, was like the burn of good wine, heady, rich and just a little dangerous. The first spell came easily enough this time. I reached toward my Valyrian steel shortsword which I earned from this very instant dungeon, and as my hand brushed the hilt, I whispered a word I hadn't known I knew from my past life. Lux. The blade lit like a lightsaber. No heat, like the Lightbringer's sword Melisandre was said to conjure herself, just light. Warm, pale gold light, steady as sunrise. Not flickering like a flame, but constant, honest, and if you would believe me, pure. I waved the glowing sword experimentally. Shadows danced along the walls of the treasure room. I could change the color, I realized. Make it red, or gold, or even sickly green, but no. Pitch black with a white bright aura suited me fine, just like the darksaber from Star Wars. A perfect weapon meant to be wielded by the next coming of the stranger. Light, a simple cantrip spell no doubt. But I could already picture its uses. As a distraction, to lure prey into the dark and gloom right before snuffing it out. Next came something else. As I touched my chest and focused inward. A wordless prayer, not exactly to the seven. Not to anything that would be flattered by hymns or statues. Just a wish, sharpened into will by the belief placed on my supposed divinity. I felt it then, a faint shimmer crawling along my skin, like a second layer of armor, translucent and cool. It wasn't quite a shield, not in the way my buckler or breastplate were. This was specific and targeted, like I had a choice in what sort of threat to repel. Cold, I thought of it, and the shimmer shifted to warm me up. Cold wouldn't shake me so easily now. A moment later I tried again. Fire threats would face a chilly layer over me, then it shifted again into something more like glass in order to shield me from acid. Each time, the faint barrier bent to my decision. Resistance, the cantrip's name floated to mind like memory. An abjuration, a minor ward against danger. Nothing flashy or absolute, but in the right fight, it could mean the difference between life and death. Then came something stranger. I cleared my throat, tested my voice and finally spoke. I am. It echoed, louder than it should have. Louder than the vocal cords on my throat allowed, as the stone walls around me almost seemed to lean in. No magic circle, no gestures, just volume. As if my words were being spoken by something larger, something older. Thaumaturgy. The name arrived like a title, ancient Andal magic I recall being referenced a couple of times throughout the seven-pointed star book. Nothing more than a parlor trick, to be honest, but effective nonetheless. A subtle tool for unsettling foes or charming crowds. Booming voice. Flickering lights. Slamming doors. A puff of wind to blow out a candle mid-threat. I could already feel the possibilities stretching ahead of me like a stage. I tested them, one by one. With a glance, a magical torch across the room flared through multiple colors, then winked out for a moment. A nearby treasure chest I had already emptied creaked open by itself, the sound theatrical and slow. From the shadows above, a phantom whisper slithered down like the hiss of a viper. I'm watching. Even knowing I'd done it, it still sent a chill up my spine. All very useful, indeed. Spare the dying was different. I sort of knew what it did, but I couldn't test it. Not yet, for I had no fallen ally I trusted enough to open up about my secrets, or that I was willing to risk their lives. Just a quiet certainty that if someone collapsed at my feet, bleeding out, I could stop the end from taking them. Not with bandages, not with a poultice, but with a whisper. As if I was the stranger himself, deciding when someone's time wasn't over. That thought lingered. I have made some considerable progress with my powers now. The kind that could spare lives with my murmur, or damn them to my silence. The last 3 spells took more effort. Real spells that drained my pool of divine magic, which it now shared with my bard spells, not costless cantrips. They demanded more of me, not just a whisper or a word, but focus. Faith, maybe in stranger or the system, hell for all I knew faith in myself was more than enough. Bless was the first. I raised my small shield, the black star gleaming faintly, and directed the spell inward, imagining the push of will, of hope, of confidence. My veins surged, not with strength exactly, but precision. Timing, a breath steadier, a heartbeat sharper. Bane was the opposite. I tested it on myself just to be aware of the fate I was ushering on my enemies, whispering the invocation and letting my intent twist downward, a pulling, unraveling effect. If Bless made my targets lucky, Bane made them clumsy. Every swing came late, every step dragged. A penalty not just to the body, but to the soul. No wonder it required a drop of blood. I pricked my thumb with my Valyrian steel dagger. The cost was just as trivial as the pain it caused, though the effect was far from it. Then came the flashiest of the lot so far, guiding bolt. It didn't take much imagination to use. I extended my hand, aimed at a patch of untouched stone near the wall and released it. The bolt screamed through the air like a comet, or perhaps more appropriately a shooting star, a streak of radiant light crashing into the wall with a flash that left afterimages dancing in my vision. Not just a weapon, a signaling flare. Whatever I hit next, I'd mark for the kill. Made me want to test it out in combination with my Hunter's Mark spell if I ever came against a particularly nasty undead monster. And finally, protection from evil and good. That one took time and literal silver. I sat for an hour, grinding the powdered metal with care, whispering quiet syllables that didn't come from any language I'd been taught but were best represented by my vague understanding of Latin. I literally made holy water, something that made this particular spell more expensive than merely expending divine points that were always recovered after a good night of long rest. When I finally pressed my hand to my chest and let the spell flow, it felt like closing a door. Something shut tight, locked from the inside. Fiends, undead, elementals and even fae. They'd find me harder to touch now. Harder to bend and harder to break. Hey, I leaned back, staring at the vault ceiling above me, as it still depicted the well-detailed map of Westeros, before muttering. So, the question still stands, since when did the stranger give power to those that honor its name? Or am I to believe that the seven were just waiting for someone interesting? The riddle was somewhat amusing, but for now I knew what I believed in. If there was any god responsible for this, it wasn't the father, nor the mother, not the warrior, nor the smith, nor the maiden or crone, nor even the stranger. It was my system, and at the end of the day, I sleep easier believing that it and I are one and the same. Title: Durrandon Baratheon, Crown Prince Medium Human, Neutral. Level: 7 Proficiency Bonus, +3. Class: Assassin B, Glamour C, Champion C, Hunter C, Alchemist D+, Cleric D. HP: 19 Aid Spell Armor Class: 19 Dragon Bone Buckler Shield plus Breastplate Armor. Divine Points: 18 Max Tier, 2. Primal Points: 14 Max Tier, 2. Arcane Points: 6 Max Tier, 1. Speed: 3.5 miles per hour 30 feet. Senses: Blind Sight 10 feet, Dark Vision 60 feet, Goggles of the Night. Traits: Font of Inspiration, Infiltration Expertise, Tactical Shift Tool Proficiency, Right Tool for the Job, Minor Alchemy, Divine Order, Divine Fullcaster. Feats: Alert Warcaster. STR: 10-0. EXP Athletics, +6. Dex: 13 +1, Proficient Save +3. EXP Acrobatics, +7. Pro Sleight of Hand, +4. EXP Stealth, +7. Con: 10-0. Int: 16 +3, Proficient Save +6. Pro Arcana, +6. Pro History, +6. Pro Investigation, +6. Nature, +5. Pro Religion, +6. Wis, 15 +2. Pro Animal Handling, +5. EXP Insight, +8. Medicine, +4. EXP Perception, +8. EXP Survival, +8. Cha, 20 +5. EXP Deception, +1-1. Intimidation, +7. EXP Performance, +1-1. Pro Persuasion, +8. Cantrips: Friends, Vicious Mockery, Shillelagh, Thorn Whip, Mending, Guidance, True Strike, Light Resistance, Spare the Dying, Thaumaturgy. First tier Divine Spells: Sleep, Hideous Laughter, Heroism, Comprehend Languages, Charm Person, Mirror Image, Bless, Bane, Cure Wounds, Protection from Evil and Good. Second tier Divine Spells: Suggestion, Phantasmal Force. First tier Primal Spells: Goodberry, Hail of Thorns, Longstrider, Animal Friendship. Second tier Primal Spells: Dark Vision, Aid. First tier Arcane Spells: Detect Magic, Purify Food and Drink, Disguise Self, Healing Word, Ray of Sickness *. Ariane Mertel's Pav. The wine was Dornish, dark and heavy with plum and spice, but it still tasted foreign under King's Landing moonlight. I swirled it in my goblet and let the cool water of the fountain kiss my ankles while my cousins lingered nearby, Obara sharpening a knife that didn't need sharpening, Tyene humming to herself like a sleepy kitten and Nymeria pretending to read by torchlight. The garden atrium of the manse my father paid for us to stay during our visit was quiet, curtained in shadows and trimmed with lion's coin, no doubt. We shouldn't have come, I knew that, we all knew that. Despite my father's melancholic feelings for my Targaryen cousin, this city was the same nest of scorpions wearing golden masks that have taken my aunt's life. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about him, Jasier Dandelions. The young man with the silver tongue, the shadow grin, and the aim of a goddamn legend. He won the archery with a wink, the melee with a laugh, and now his name bloomed in every brothel and ballroom like spring fever. And he'd looked at me, not just at my hips or the crown my name carried, but me, and I'd smiled back like a fool. I don't like it, Obara muttered from the archway. Too quiet. This place stinks of a Lannister trap. You're drunk, Tyene said sweetly, plucking a fig from the platter. And paranoid. So are you, Obara snapped. Just better at hiding it. Nymeria didn't even glance up. If they were going to poison us, they'd have done it in the first course. I took a sip of wine, letting their voices blur into the background. My mind was elsewhere, for I could still hear his voice. I aim to please, princess. The way he'd bowed after disarming 3 knights twice his age, almost like a rogue prince out of a Rhoynar tale. And then I felt it, the shift. Not a sound, not a gust of wind. Just something in the air, like the pause before a kiss. My eyes flicked to the shadowed archway, and sure enough, there he was. Leaning against a painted pillar as if he'd been born there, in that very moment, cloak the color of ink, a wide-brimmed hat in his hand, and that same maddening smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Your wine tastes finer than the Red Keeps, Princess of Dorne. He said, voice like music, low and sure. But I dare say your company is sweeter still. Obara moved fast, blade out, ready to call the guards, until I raised a hand and stopped her. Let him speak. He bowed, exaggerated and theatrical, a peacock with a poet's tongue. Fear not, I come bearing no threat or ill will but a well-tuned lute and a head full of compliments. You're mad, Tyene giggled, delighted. Do you know what this is? Where you are? Of course, my lady. He said, strolling closer, slow as molasses. This is the nest of vipers. But I'm not afraid, for I have come to charm them. Nymeria looked up at him with cool detachment. You shouldn't be here. The gates are watched. Watched by men who know how to drink, he said in a dismissive yet polite manner. And how to look away for just the right amount of flattery and a tale of love. Did you climb walls? I asked, arching a brow while not entirely believing in the tale he was telling us. Or just turn into a shadow and float past the guards. He grinned. A magician never reveals his tricks. Obara snorted but didn't lower her blade. Tyene looked like she wanted to feed him grapes and pull him into her lap. Nymeria kept watching, weighing and measuring. And I let him come closer. There was something fierce about the way he moved, not like a courtier, not even like a knight, but like a street cat who knows every alley and where to bare his claws. He knelt by the pool and looked up at me. 4 desert roses, he said softly, blooming in a garden far from home. I must be dreaming. I stood, wine forgotten, and walked toward him. You climbed into my father's manse to flirt? I asked. Or are you here to steal something? Both, he said, without missing a beat. A kiss, a secret, a moment worth remembering, or anything the 4 of you judge appropriate for the amount of entertainment I end up bringing to you by the end of my visit. He met my eyes and didn't flinch, but I swear that I felt the heat creep up my throat. You're lucky I'm in a generous mood, Jasier dandelions. Was the only reply I was able to give him. I always bet on generosity, he said, standing. Especially yours, princess. Then earn it, I added while finally getting Obara to calm down. He unslung his lute with a flourish and strummed a soft chord that shivered across the water. I intend to. He strummed another chord, and the sound rippled over the water like silk unraveling in slow motion. Even Obara, fierce as she was, stopped grinding her teeth. Will you really sing for us? Tyene asked, biting into a fig. Jasier dandelions gave her a mock bow. Sing, juggle, tumble, and tempt fate, if it pleases the court of snakes. Nymeria snorted softly. Careful, we've buried men for less. I don't doubt it. He twirled one of the empty goblets from the platter, spinning it between his fingers before balancing it on the tip of one. But I've heard your court prefers a touch of flair to its executions. Obara rolled her eyes but finally sheathed her blade. Fine, impress us. You get one chance. Oh, I don't believe in chances, he said. Only in moments. Then he played, not some bawdy tavern tune or the dreary harp songs that pass for ballads in everywhere else. No, this was something strange and swaying, like a shadow dance. His fingers moved like quicksilver, coaxing a melody that felt half Rhoynish, half SOC, and entirely spellbinding. The music curled around our ankles, climbed our spines, settled in our chests like heat after wine. And then, the verses came. He began with Obara, of all people. A viper raised on spear and spite, who'd rather bleed than bow to fright. Yet sharpest steel, if quenched in flame, can learn to kill and still play the game. Obara blinked. That was as close to stunned as she ever got. She didn't speak, didn't smile, but she listened. That was enough. He turned to Nymeria. Silver masks and courtroom grace, 8,000 words, one quiet face. But whisper soft and plot precise, she is her mother's loaded dice. Nymeria's mouth twitched. That little almost smile she gave when she thought no one was looking. Mother Royne, he saw everything. Tyenne's verse came last of my cousins. Sweet as milk, but milk can scald, beneath her kiss, the dead have sprawled. She prays with hands both clean and red, and sings of love beside the dead. Tyene laughed, delighted. You've been learning about us. Of course, he said, unabashed. One does not walk into a garden of poison without learning the names of each bloom. And me? I asked, already knowing he'd saved the most dangerous verse for last. He looked at me then, truly looked, and for a moment, the jester's smile faltered into something like reverence. For her, no rhyme will ever do. The sun itself would dim on cue. A crownless queen with flame for grace, the storm she rides will burn this place. My breath caught. I hated how much I liked the way he said it, like I was legend to come, not just legacy from the past. I stepped toward him. You steal words the way others steal kisses. And if I steal both? He asked, standing now, lute slung behind him again. Would you demand payment? That depends. What else have you stolen tonight? I asked. Jasier responded by extending a hand. A moment of your time. The way he said it, low and smooth like a promise whispered in a tent at midnight. I didn't take his hand, I placed mine in it. He pulled me gently toward the mosaic tiles near the edge of the pool, and then we were dancing, not a court dance, but something freer, more fluid, more passionate. Though his steps were precise but playful, he let me lead, then stole it back, then offered it again. Meanwhile, he kept talking. There's a knight in the tourney whose squire takes coin to poison rivals' horses. A hedge bard who's not a bard at all but a spy for all town. And a baker's boy who should have died years ago but keeps showing up in the strangest places. I raised an eyebrow. You have many tales. I have many eyes and ears, he replied, twirling me once before letting me rest a hand on his shoulder. Most of them not my own. Tyene watched us with fascination. Nymeria seemed to be filing every word into a ledger only she could see. Obara leaned against the pillar now, arms crossed but no longer scowling. Where do you come from, truly? I asked. Not the Stormlands. Not with that tongue. He leaned in slightly, voice low like a secret shared under a blanket of stars. I once fell in love with a princess who lived in a tower of brass, guarded by wind and flame. Her father locked her behind 7 walls, but I slipped in wearing rags, and left in silks, with the lamp, the tiger, and a wish-granting genie on my side. Obara scoffed. Tyene's eyes widened. Nymeria tilted her head, considering. You lie, I said, lips curving in spite of myself. Only when the truth is weirder than fiction. He said cheerfully. That's because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities, truth isn't. And this tale? I asked. He spun me again, and when I landed back in his arms, his voice was velvet. Would it matter, if you believed it just long enough to dream? I should have pulled away, should have questioned him more, tested his claims. But instead, I held his gaze, and let him steal one more moment. The man was smoke and silk and seduction. Mother Royne help me, for I wanted to breathe him in. Durrandon Baratheon's Pav. There's a particular kind of silence after a performance, not applause, not even breathless awe, but something deeper. A stillness filled with appraisal. Anticipation. As if the room itself holds its breath. That silence hung over the Martell manse like smoke. Obara broke it first, with a murmur while rising to her feet with the sharp grace of a predator. You sing well, but anyone can hide behind a lute. She tossed me a practice spear from a rack beneath the archway, worn smooth by years of drills. I caught it on reflex, spinning it with a flourish that might have looked like bravado, and partially was, but also disguised the flick of a true strike weave pulsing through my fingertips ready to be released. Let's see if you can keep rhythm with bruises. She said, circling me. Or will you sing excuses? A lady after my heart, I said, stepping into the dance of sparring, not to win, but to move with her. The crack of wood rang sharp in the garden, shadows flickering across the tiles with every feint and dodge. Obara fought like someone who'd never been allowed to lose, and I let her strike close enough to almost win. Behind her, Tyene lounged beside the fountain, plucking figs from a carved silver dish. Don't break him, sister. She called sweetly. We haven't even asked him the important questions yet. Such as. I deflected Obara's jab, catching it with the shaft of my spear and twisting it gently from her hand, enough to disarm, never humiliate. Such as whether he's a sinner or a saint. Tyene tilted her head, smile gentle, but eyes hard enough to cut glass. Or if he believes in redemption. Not for everyone, I said, stepping away from Obara, who let me go with a grunt and a smirk. But for anyone. And you? She asked. I've sinned, I said, sitting beside her on the marble ledge, still catching my breath. Lied, stolen, once betrayed a man who trusted me because it was the only way to save a city. That make me evil, sweet one. Tyene leaned close, brushed her fingers along my jaw. Makes you interesting, she whispered. But not innocent. I haven't claimed innocence since I was 5. I whispered back. That made Nymeria snort. She'd been watching, glass in hand, leaning against a pillar draped in indigo silk. And how old were you when you started spinning tales instead of truths? I turned, hand over heart. Ah, Lady Nymeria, I never truly lie. Only wrap the truth in enough riddles to strangle a maester. She said, approaching with slow, measured steps. You knew our names. You knew where to find us. You choreographed a song like a court performance. Who sent you? No one. Not in the Faceless Men. No one, but literally no one. I took her glass and sipped before handing it back, noticing how he faltered once I mentioned the infamous group of assassins. But I've listened, learned. The world whispers if you know how to listen. I watched her watch me, no flicker of belief, but no outright doubt either. Just calculation. The way a player weighs the board before making a bold move. And what do you want, Bard? She asked, tone light, but loaded. To matter. I said it simply, no poetry needed. To be heard, to never vanish. Something shifted in her expression, not sympathy, but understanding. She raised her glass again, silent and in spoken respect. Obara had slumped against a column, sweat on her brow, half laughing now. He's a bastard, just like us. Not quite, Ariane said at last. The princess had watched all this unfold from the stone balcony near the closest window with a good view of the capital city, her silhouette a frame of fire and curve, cloaked in torchlight. He's something stranger. I looked up. Care to define strange, princess? No need, she replied. Come, I want to see the city. I joined her, the others falling back, not dismissed or retreating, but giving space. Almost as a passing of the torch. The balcony offered a view of King's Landing sprawled in crooked gold beneath the moonlight, its chaos softened by distance. You've captured their interest, not for the first time in a day. She said, not looking at me. That's not easy. Should I be flattered? I asked. You should be careful, turning to face me with a teasing smile. We bite. I like sharp edges, I replied with a casual yet respectful gesture. She smiled, faintly. Then tell me something real. Not a performance. Not a riddle. I took a breath, and gave her the deception of a lifetime. I had a brother once. Not by blood, but I'd have died for him. He was better than me in every way. He died in the rebellion trying to protect a king who never even knew his name. Ariane turned to me. Her eyes gleamed, not from pity, but recognition. Then you know what it is to be forgotten. I nodded. She stepped closer. When I was a girl, my Aunt Elia used to braid my hair. She told me I would marry a prince. That I laughed like summer. I studied her, candlelight flickering in her curls. You still do. Laugh like that. She touched my hand, fingers brushing mine like a secret, and for a moment, we simply stood in silence. The garden buzzed faintly below with the sound of water, wine and low murmurs from 3 women pretending not to listen. The manse changed after dusk, shadows deepened, wine darkened and time twisted like silk in water. I don't remember when the music stopped, only that our moans began to sound like music themselves, raw and rhythmic, rising and falling like the tide. This wasn't just mere seduction, not really. Chataya had taught me the difference. This was long-lasting, wilder, a ritual that carved my existence into their hearts masquerading as pleasure. A communion, a binding of heat, wit, and will. Obara came first, teeth bared, laughter sharp, all fire and friction. She didn't seek pleasure, she hunted it. Wrestled me. I let her believe she was in control just long enough for her to lose it. Her climax came like a battle won, loud, rough and triumphant, blissfully ignorant to how I pulled her hair and left handprints on her bottoms. Nymeria joined, clothed in cynicism and calculation. I thought she'd stay on the sidelines, watching like a bored teacher. Instead, she moved with deliberate elegance, fingers tracing the paths she wanted followed. Finding her weak spot, the place just beneath her ribs where a kiss could unmake her, felt like solving a puzzle meant for kings. She whispered in Old Valyrian, words of silk and smoke, letting the language of dragons carry her gasps. Tyene never entered so much as appeared, already halfway across the room. Fingers at my throat, lips at my ear, whispering a prayer disguised as filth. There was a kindness in her, or maybe it was cruelty disguised as affection, I didn't care. Thanks to her play acting as a septa, I could proudly say that I've risked another kink from my bucket list. Ariane Martell, the Princess Jasmine to my Aladdin, came last. Or perhaps she'd been there from the beginning, reigning rather than participating. Her touch was not an invitation, but a claim. She tried to take me, to possess me. But I had not survived the pit of vipers to become someone else's prey. That was when I stopped following their rhythm and said it. No more pretending to yield before them, no more proving myself. From that moment on, I danced them to my music. What followed was not love. To be honest, it wasn't even just mere acts of lust. But the work of myths, if I may say so myself. Ouroboros, that ancient image of the self-devouring serpent, flashed in my mind with every shiver and scream. A perfect loo, predator and prey in the same body. I earned myself heroic inspiration more times than I could count on that night, simply from hearing how loud I could make them cry out. The night wasn't one thing, it was many. Twists of limbs and tangled hair, heat and shadow, breath and sweat. Their bodies curled against mine, their curves catching the moonlight like sculptures carved of starlight and defiance. Tyenne's laugh blurred into Obara's growl. Figs on Nymeria's lips and the soft clink of her knives being discarded one by one. A small, strange trust. Ariane's gaze locked on my flexing form like a queen contemplating her new prize. And then, everything and nothing, all at the same time. When dawn came, I was already gone. Like a song that lingers in the memory of those who truly listened. Ariane Myrtle's paw. The sun rose too fast. It always does after nights like that, the kind that taste like dreams but leave something behind. Something small but irreversible, a theft of certainty. If father ever learned, I'd be locked in the water gardens for a year with nothing but sermons and lemon water for company. But it wasn't shame I felt. It was something quieter and heavier. Jasier was gone. No note, no trace. Not even a whisper of trail to follow. Just the fading hum of his voice, echoing inside me like the ghost of a song I didn't know I'd memorized. Tyene sat by the fountain, bare feet in the water, blonde hair still tangled. She wore a smile like a veil, dreamy and unreadable, her fingers brushing places she hadn't expected to ache. Interesting man, she murmured. I like him. Obara didn't speak at first. She slammed her fist into a column hard enough to split the plaster, as her knuckles bled. Cocky bastard, she finally muttered. I'll cut his cock off, if I find him. Nymeria stood on the terrace, wind stirring her hair. Her eyes were distant, thoughtful. She hadn't spoken since he left. I said nothing. In my palm, I finally noticed the token he left behind, a single black rose. Its stem wrapped in silver thread, delicate yet impossible to unwind. Like a promise with no words. We didn't speak about the night. Not truly. We didn't joke, didn't share details, didn't compete for who he made scream last, or who was used to helping pleasure the others. That silence settled among us like the scent of sweat and citrus, the scent of something that changed us. He had not just taken something from us, but had also left something, and that was the problem. As we sat there in silence, a princess, a pious poisoner, a cynic cutthroat, and a warrior of conflicting feelings, a few questions bound us tighter than the pleasure we'd shared. Who really was him? Why us? And when will we see him together? John Aaron's Pav. Ah, another day, another morning. Such wonders a good night of uninterrupted sleep can bring to a man. Unfortunately, I find myself suffering from the abundance of such nights. Especially since Lisa once again didn't seem willing to open her legs for me. Not that I blame her. For a young maiden like her, I must look the farthest of the gallant knight I once was, but it is still frustrating to have her father constantly dropping subtle and polite inquiries about when we should be expecting the son that would be expected to inherit the veil. But enough of all that whinging. As I took my usual place beside the king's empty seat, I noted with some dismay that, even now, despite the queen and her younger twins already being seated, Robert had yet to appear. Queen Cersei sat proud and cold as a winter frost, her younger son Lan clad in bright Baratheon gold, while little young Joanna wore a wreath of lilies in her hair and watched the hall with wide, curious eyes. Around me, the great lords of the realm filled the Red Keep's great hall for the morning feast. Lords bantered. Servants wove between trestle tables. The smell of honeyed ham and fresh bread mingled with rose oil and casual oaths. Lord Stannis arrived in his usual fashion, grim, tight-lipped, jaw clenched like a trap ready to spring. He sat beneath his niece and nephew with that same scowl he'd worn since boyhood, just as Robert once described him to me in the Vale. At his side was Esser Davos Seaworth, calm and ever watchful. The Onion Knight offered me a polite nod, which I returned with a faint smile. Of those who ought to be here, only Robert, the Crown Prince, and the Warden of the West remained absent. But that changed soon enough. A long shadow fell over me. I looked up, and there he was, Lord Tywin Lannister. Cloaked in crimson and gold, posture rigid as a tower, face carved from cold stone. Good morning, Lord Aaron. He said. Ah, good morning, Lord Lannister. I rose with the stiffness that age insists upon, barely reaching his shoulder. How was your first night in the capital? Familiar, he said, the word polished smooth like a coin. Not fond, not displeased. Simply, settled. I nodded. That is good to hear. His gaze was sharp and measuring. There was no smile on his lips, only that faint tilt of the mouth he used in place of pleasantries. I suspected it was the closest thing to warmth a man like him ever showed. I must congratulate you on your young protege, Lord Hand, he said. Prince Durandon seems to growing into a fine boy, sharp-minded, composed, and gifted in studies that challenge grown men. I allowed myself a thin smile. He's had excellent teachers. The Grand Maester grounds him in history and reason. The Lord Commander oversees his physical training. I simply keep him from mischief and try to instill a sense of duty. Tywin inclined his head, though I sensed skepticism beneath it, as if he thought I understated my role. Or overstated it. It was hard to tell with Tywin Lannister. Regardless, he said. From what I hear, the boy impresses. And I understand he'll be joining me at Castle Rock. So it seems. A bond with his mother's house is both wise and proper. I forced a note of warmth into my voice. I trust you'll be a steady guide, Lord Tywin. A relationship like that must prosper, he said, his eyes drifting briefly toward the Queen and her younger children. And I suppose it falls to me to ensure that it does. It's my duty to aid in his growth. That struck more deeply than I let on. Tywin Lannister, guiding the king's heir, it was a notion ripe with possibility and peril. But I smiled all the same. I'm glad to hear it. I met his gaze directly. It is, as you said, a much-needed relationship. There's no doubt, he replied. Then, after a beat, he continued. I understand the Crown Prince must be preoccupied by the celebration, but if I may, I would speak with him. Privately, before we leave the capital. I inclined my head. Of course, my lord. But I'm afraid he and his grace have already departed for the tourney field. The king insisted on riding out early. They were eager to begin, given what's at stake today. The victor will be named the prince's sworn shield, after all. But once the dust settles, I'll have him sent to you. That will suffice. Tywin nodded once. I look forward to our meeting. With that, he turned and strode off, toward his daughter, his sons and his grandchildren. I watched him go, unsettled despite his civility. Tywin Lannister did not offer praise without purpose. Nor mentorship without motive. I sank back into my seat and rubbed at my temple, the dull ache there a familiar burden. Gods help me, I thought. I am indeed getting too old for all of this. Queen Cersei's Pav. I used to love tournaments as a child. The colors, the music, the way knights rode as if they truly believed themselves invincible. It had seemed a dream then, a dream spun from gold and steel and pageantry. Years later, and here I was again. Now, it was noise, blood and dirt dressed in silk. I had seen a dozen of tournaments since marrying Robert, and in each, I found less to admire. The best rider won the joust, the best swordsman the melee. Archery was a chore, and the rest, feasts and fools. But this one at least had purpose. Some foreign sellsword, or knight, or gods know what else people's claimed that bard was, had stolen half the spectacle already. A man of too many titles and too much flair, who rumors claimed to hail from so many lands I was certain half those tales were fiction. But the man's skill was real, uncomfortably so. He had nearly stolen the melee and performed unerringly in the archery, but at least the drama helped with my boredom. Still, all of that paled beside the true matter at hand, the joust. For today, the victor of the lists would be named sworn shield to the crown prince. My eldest son, ever the dutiful one, always looking for reasons to protect others. It had been his excuse to take up books and arms early, well before custom allowed. He used duty like a sword, wielding it to carve his path where rules would block him. If the boy required a champion of his own, then let the knights fight for the privilege. Beside me, Lan bounced in his seat, struggling to stay upright beneath the weight of his little velvet doublet. He had insisted on wearing his lion armor, a golden-stitched tunic with pauldrons no larger than a man's palm. His eyes followed the knights as they prepared, wide with innocent awe. He's going to win, he whispered to no one in particular, pointing to a hedge knight in white and red. I saw him sharpen his sword yesterday. That's a lance tourney, my love. I gently corrected him. Not swords. Oh, he said, blinking. Can lances be sharpened? Before I could answer, Joanna gave a snort. Seated just a little closer to the crown prince, her hands were clasped in her lap, dainty and deliberate. But her eyes were narrowed and hungry. I hope they hurt each other. She commented offhandedly, her voice light as summer air. I glanced down at her, and for a moment, her face was all innocence again, pink cheeks and soft curls beneath a wreath of wildflowers. But her smile lingered too long. There was something in her that occasionally unsettled me. Joanna had never much cared for people, save one. Everything she did for Dawn. And he, of course, encouraged her. He always did. Now, she giggled from his lap, squirming as he tickled her ribs, her tiny laughter ringing like bells in a temple. Lan watched from the corner of his eye but didn't join them. He rarely did anymore. Not out of jealousy. He simply knew Joanna didn't want him near, she had made that clear early on. That and the fact that Durandon still tried his best to equally share his time with both the twins. And for that effort, in front of Dawn, they played the part of loving twins. They held hands when asked and even smiled for him. How long that pretense would last, I did not know. But for now, the trumpets sounded. The jousting was about to begin. And all eyes turned to the field. Durrandon Baratheon's Pav. I braced myself for hours of jousting. The crowd was electric, restless, drunk on spectacle. I, meanwhile, sat with my back straight and eyes alert, feigning more excitement than I felt while also entertaining my baby half-sister. Just like the other nobles present at the royal pavilion, Tyrells were also present, Lord Mace in his blustering, self-satisfied glory. He spoke loudly and laughed often, accompanied by his wife and elder sons. The eldest, Willas, I noted, still winced when he moved too quickly, his first joust had ended poorly. But his brother, Garland, looked eager to prove himself the first opportunity he was granted. Tourneys weren't boring, just predictable. Though, at the very least most of the knights not worth watching were too battered from the melee to compete. Still, men trained since they were boys for events like these, chasing glory they'd likely never taste. Most wouldn't even rise to the level of footnotes in a bard's song. But here they were, some few out in shining armor, but all hungry for attention. Uncle Jamie wouldn't leave King's Landing even if he won, not that he wouldn't try to. He always plays the part, regardless of the script. Sandor Clegane was also in the list. That surprised me. I didn't peg him for a man who gave a shit about pageantry or titles. Then again, maybe this was just another excuse to break bones with royal permission. Esser Aris Oakhart from the Reach and Esser Balin Swan from the Stormlands had also joined. Not yet household names, but talented enough to earn my eye. Alongside them, a few hedge knights who'd managed to avoid the carnage of the melee, either by luck or cowardice. Like I've already mentioned, the joust itself was a simple concept. A fence between the riders, a wooden lance in hand, blunted to avoid death, mostly. It was far safer than the melee, sure, but not exactly tame. A broken bone here, shattered teeth there, all part of the performance. The warlance, despite its elegance, was never meant to entertain. It was built for shock, for speed, for raw destructive force. Yet in the lists, repetition almost dulled its menace. It was all structure now. Rules and presentation. My father gave the call to begin, his voice boomed across the field like thunder. The first tilt was to be, the Hound versus some forgettable Tully cousin of Lisa's. I didn't catch the man's first name, I barely cared to. What chance did he have? A runt barely brushing 6 feet, up against the younger brother of a monster. Wooden lances or not, Sandor Clegane was more than dangerous. Predictably, the match ended in a blink. The Tully left with a broken arm and a jaw hanging off center. A lucky man, all things considering. A few dull jousts followed. Men tipping each other like badly balanced statues. Then Clegane rode out again, this time facing one of the many Freys, Stefan the Sweet. Sweet. I barely held out a snort. Gods, what a nickname for a man. The Freys breed faster than rabbits and uglier than weasels. This one didn't look like he'd ever held a sword outside a practice yard. Against Sandor, the outcome felt preordained. Still, I watched as they charged. Frey's lance hit Sandor's shield, deflected like a twig off a boulder. The Hound slammed into him with a brutal shoulder check that nearly sent the man flying. Credit where it's due, he didn't fall. Second pass, Sandor raised his lance high, striking down like a smith hammering iron. Frey raised both hands to block with his shield. It flew from his grasp like a leaf in the wind. Surely I wasn't the only one to notice blood in the water, for Sandor pressed the attack before Frey could be handed a fresh shield. One more tilt, and the Hound's lance crashed into Frey's face. Likely broke his nose, maybe more. Final pass, Sandor struck with merciless precision. The Frey knight finally went down, unconscious, blood pouring from his face and a dent carved deep into the thinner segment of his breastplate. In a real battle, he'd be a corpse and the Hound would already be looking for his next kill. But I'd be lying if I said the fray didn't last longer than I expected. A reminder, perhaps, that I still had more to learn before claiming I truly understood this battlefield. As expected, Sandor advanced to the next round and bets were flying fast now. Most favored the Kingsguard Knights. The smart coin always did. They'd dominated the previous tournaments. Legends like Esser Jaime and Esser Barristan were names commoners would remember their antipathy for the former of the latter age. But my attention stayed on Sandor. The hound was almost as fearsome as his brother, maybe more since he had his vengeance ever so present on his mind. He'd been killing since 12, they said, and although he might not match Gregor's size, even though he's the closest one to that, where the mountain was used to weaker opponents, Sandor was focused on defeating one considerably stronger than him. Pain honed, scarred and motivated him. By now, the crowd had fully surrendered to the thrill. Cheers erupted with every shattered lance and knights and horse to roaring applause. All for the thrill of it. The joust dragged on longer than I liked. Not as wild as the melee, not as quick as the archery. But still, it served its purpose. Barristan the bold and horsed Uncle Jaime, that certainly woke me up from my moment of boredom. Thunderous applause shook the pavilion as the old knight saluted the crowd. The commoners screamed his name like he was the warrior reborn, while even some of the already drunken ones spat offenses at the Kingslayer nickname. This is quite amazing, said Jon Arryn beside my father. I don't recall any other tourney drawing such an enthusiastic crowd. Robert beamed like a boy who'd just swung his first sword. This was his vision, a celebration of triumph, strength, legacy. A reminder of his victory at the Trident, of what it meant to be loved by the people. This is what all tourneys should be. Robert bellowed. Men bleeding for glory, gold, and fame. Let the rest of us howl like the beasts we are. He filled his goblet, wine spilling onto his fingers. If not for the bloody winters, I'd host a dozen of these a year. Jon Arryn sipped his wine, likely wishing it were milk. It's been a chaotic time. The king said, more thoughtful now. The transition of power made things stable, but not fulfilling. People need moments like these. To breathe, to feel. Jon smiled, raising his glass. Robert wasn't always as irresponsible as he looked. Eventually, we were down to the final 16. The yard cleared and everyone's focus sharpened. Then 8. Then 4. Then 2. Sandor Clegane and Esser Barristan Selmy. A match that had drawn blood long before they ever tilted. Sandor had undoubtedly wanted to face his brother, the Mountain. That grudge ran deep, as old as fire and toys and childhood screams. But the Mountain hadn't come to the capital, probably due to Tywin's command and foresight to avoid conflict with the Martells. Which meant Sandor had been only releasing his frustrations on every poor man that was unlucky to have been pitted against him. Further down the royal pavilion, I caught Prince Doran Martell glaring at the crowd. He obviously didn't seem pleased to hear the name, Clegane, chanted with such adoration. Tyrion, for his part, nursed his wine, having already lost his whoring coin on earlier bets, more specifically once his brother was enhorsed by Barristan Selmy. The dwarf Lannister wisely stayed silent now. When the finalists entered, the crowd rose to its feet. 2 warhorses, 2 men of different worlds. One, the people's knight. The other, the people's weapon. They bowed to the king and rode to their marks just as silence fell. Then came the signal. Barristan leaned forward, lance poised. Fast, focused. His steed galloped like it had been born to tilt. While Sandor lowered his shield, held firm. The two met with a thunderous clash. Barristan's lance clipped Sandor's shoulder while the hound shattered the older knight's shield. But Selmy didn't fall. Again, they charged. Again, they clashed. Sparks flew. The third pass ended with neither man yielding. Then, Barristan raised his lance and lowered it moments before declaring, I forfeit. The entire yard froze. So he's my sworn shield. I muttered, intending to shake my father into motion. Robert caught the words and seized the moment with a thunderous shout. People of King's Landing, may I present your champion? The crowd exploded with cheers. Barristan, ever the responsible Lord Commander, had chosen wisely. A shattered rib or a broken limb might have kept him from his post. And the old knight had something he wanted from Robert, something he couldn't afford to risk losing just by not being in top shape. Sandor didn't care how he won, in his eyes victory was victory. Sandor Clegane, Robert declared. I, Robert of House Baratheon, first of my name, King of the Andals, the Royner, and the First Men, hereby name you sworn shield to my eldest son, Durandon Baratheon. And with that, now I had a protector. A weapon, maybe even a friend, if I played my cards right. Not today, perhaps, but soon. He hadn't entered this joust to become a babysitter. But he'd heard the right words before it began. Words that convinced him. Sandor might not realize it yet, but he was on his way to join my cult of the stranger, especially if it could one day grant him the vengeance he has been seeking out so desperately. Sandor took a knee and gave his vow. A sworn shield is more than a guard and more than a sword. He reflects his lord's honor, as well as his strength and his judgment. He must go further than expected. Never flinch. Never falter. And above all, never bring shame to the one he serves. The 10th of December 2021. The 24th of April 2022. The 1st of January 2025. Hope this chapter is of your liking. Anything you wish to ask, feel free to do so. Check out my auxiliary chapter if you still haven't. Thanks as always for your attention and please be safe. Any problems with my writing, just point them out and I will correct them as soon as possible. Your gift is the motivation for my creation. Give me more motivation. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Vote for me. I tagged this book, come and support me with a thumbs up. Like it, add to library, have some idea about my story. Comment it and let me know. Daichi_TBR 193 creators, thoughts.